This is Audible.
Audiobook Empire presents a cyberpunk saga. Ina said. Undeniable. Fear began to grip him as he felt his heart rate and breathing quicken. A massive hand landed on his shoulder. "You'll be fine," Stan said, and as Moss looked up, something in Stan's eyes made him feel like the words were true. Moss breathed in deeply just before the first-generation cab they had hired shuddered and began to drop to the landing pad. It hissed to the ground, vibrating and jerking as it landed. The door clanged open and they stepped out. As he put his foot to the ground, Moss realized that he hadn't been made sick by the descent. He smiled. "I will be fine," he told Stan. The landing pads were on a raised platform off the side of the forum, a place which served as a meeting spot between the burbs where friends could eat and shop and feel as though they had left home without the discomfort of actually doing so. A large plaza of decorative marble with a fountain and hollow-projected trees was flanked on all sides by restaurants, cafes, boutique shops, and travel agencies. Relief aids stood like statues outside the bars, ready for rental by inebriated employees. Stan's eyes scanned around the space. He turned to Moss. "Know where we meet your friend?" "Yeah," Moss said, pointing to Nonsense Restaurant. Izzy had invited Moss to join her family there for dinner on occasion, and though he had never taken her up on the offer, he figured she would be there. They made their way to the restaurant as the smells of spices and curry filled their nostrils. The scent instantly brought back memories of eating dinners Vihan cooked for them in his hex. "We may leave here now, but it's important to remember where you come from. These are the tastes of your home, though you may never go there," he had told his daughter before setting the plates in front of them. And though Moss had infrequently joined them for dinner, the smell in the forum made him feel that he was home. Izzy waved them from the window, a half-eaten plate of biryani set before her. Confusion coursed through him as he looked at her. Her jet-black hair pulled into a bun, beautiful brown skin showing from under her armor, and bright chestnut eyes smiling at him. His heart began to race once more, though this time not for fear of what lay ahead. Stan smiled and half-mocked. "I get it now." "You saw her before," Moss reminded him. "It's different in person," Stan told him. He was right. Though it had only been 2 days, seeing her again now stirred something within him. She stood as they entered and sprang into his arms, her armor clattering. She stepped back and looked him in the eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked, as though they had been parted for years. "I am," Moss said. "You?" "I'm fine. How did you take the news? How did you find out?" "I'm sorry I didn't tell you." She looked so apologetic Moss could hardly stand it. "I found out from the person we are here to help," Moss explained, "and I'm fine. It's okay that you didn't tell me. I know you were doing what you thought was best." "How much do you know about them?" Stan cleared his throat theatrically and the two turned. Izzy nodded in understanding and turned to the middle-aged man with thinning hair behind the counter. "Kunil, turn the music up and stir a pot in the back." He hurriedly followed the command and disappeared into the kitchen. The room became filled with synthesized sitar and a woman singing slowly. Moss had never heard Izzy act as a BurbSec officer before and was impressed by the effect. She appraised Stan and asked Moss, "Who's your friend?" "Stan," Moss introduced as the large man intentionally loomed over her. "Izzy," she said, extending a hand and smiling in a way that indicated that she was unimpressed by his attempt to intimidate her. "Ferocious Stan," he corrected in a tone more threatening than friendly. Izzy wrinkled her nose at Moss almost imperceptibly as they shook. "We can talk here?" Stan clarified, looking suspiciously around the room. "Yes," Izzy answered. "Family friend and I'm off duty." "Good," Stan said. "What do you boys need from me?" she asked, forgoing small talk. Stan opened his mouth to speak, but Moss beat him to it. Before we begin, you need to understand something," he said, and both stared at him in shock. "Yeah?" Izzy said. He cleared his throat to buy time and averted his eyes. This is a big ask. You help us now, you may be giving up your whole life. Oh, she said sullenly, looking down and shifting one foot as she thought. She helps us, Byrne says we can take her on, Stan announced to Moss. Then he turned to Izzy. Sorry, he corrected. Hate it when people talk about me like I'm not in the room. You help, you can come with us. Thank you, she said, not looking up. Moss could hear the internal struggle in 2 short words, and worried as to what she and Stan were thinking at the moment. Leaving had been hard for him, though he left little behind except for comfort. It would be much different for Izzy. She had a life that she had worked for, a job she was good at, and a life she enjoyed. She had her dad and friends. Asking her to risk all that for him made him feel sick. You can say no, Moss offered, in that moment hoping she would. She turned such sad eyes upon him that he nearly demanded she went back to her hex. I'll help, she said. For you. Moss did not know what to make of that. I left you in the dark for so long, she said by way of justification, though Moss did not know if the words were for him or for herself. You don't have to, he told her. You could just walk away. She thought on his words as Stan shifted with impatience under the bright fluorescent lights. I'll help, she announced once more. What do you need? Can you get us into the Carcer Corp facility where they transfer prisoners from Burbsec? Moss asked. Yeah, she answered. I know there has been activity. It's what everyone is talking about since the lockdown. Stan asked, You have access to the cells? Sure, I have to be able to put people there myself, she explained. Though of course I never have. It's all traceable, Stan reminded her unnecessarily. Once we are inside, we'll deal with the Carcer guards. When you say, deal with, Izzy asked, worry covering her face. I mean deal with, Stan intoned in such a way as to leave no doubt. Izzy nodded her understanding. Gonna finish that? Stan asked, pointing to the plate of spiced rice. What? No, Izzy answered, looking nonplussed. She pushed the plate of food to Stan and handed him the fork, which he took graciously. Energy, man, Stan justified to Moss as he sat. Split it? No, Moss answered, too struck by the shift to say anything else. Stan sat and worked at the food voraciously. Safe to say, your life has changed, Izzy joked nervously, pulling a piece of sleeve which stuck out from under the wrist of her armor and rubbing it between her thumb and forefinger. You are not wrong, Moss said, wearing a weak smile. He could not even begin to tell her how much his life had changed. Where's Gibbs? She asked. He came with you, right? The guilt hung on his every word. I'll tell you later. Chapter 12. They strode through the forum, a Burbsec officer and 2 obvious city dwellers turning more than a few heads. Izzy led them to a corridor between 2 buildings as Stan snickered. What? Moss asked. Stan smirked. You catch the name of that bar? Lewd and Lascivious? Moss answered with a shrug. He had never been, but knew Gibbs would go there with some of his co-workers from time to time. Yeah, Stan laughed. A sports bar with girls in hot pants dancing on the tables? You fucking bubs don't even know the meaning of lewd and lascivious. Having seen the long-legged spinners even from the outside, Moss had to agree, and began to speak before Izzy hissed, Will you 2 hush up? They approached a concrete pillbox with the Burbsec seal painted on a thick metal door. Entry code 610, Moss heard her command in his mind, and the barcode on her name tag was scanned before the door hissed open. There's a lot of these side entrances, so the average employee doesn't see people being dragged very far, Izzy explained as she led them down concrete steps whose yellow paint had been worn off over time. Light bulbs in metal cages illuminated the corridor, which seemed to stretch on as far as Moss could see. They walked a while before Izzy spoke again. Ferocious Stan, she began respectfully. You should take the lead here. There will be a guard stationed as we round the next corner. Right, he said, and stepped in front of them, cracking his knuckles with dramatic flair. They stepped past a line of demarcation spray painted on the floor, the blue beehive shield logo of Burbsec on the near side, and the handcuffed scorpion pincer emblem of the Carcer Corporation on the other. Thank you, Iz, Moss said. She turned sorrowful eyes on him as he heard her neural command, Security Order 19? That was it. He wasn't surprised, only disappointed. "Listen, Moss," she began, but his hand was already reaching for the weapon at his side. It was not instinct as it had been with the biker. It was a calculated move. He knew how much he had asked of her, how much she would have had to give up to help them. He also knew how much it would help her Burbsack career if she stopped them. He had hoped that she wouldn't betray them, but he understood why she had. Alpine emblem of the Carcer Corporation from the outside. Moss answered with a shrug. He had never been, but knew Gibbs would go on a smile. Pulling the Shan. "Gonna finish that?" Stan asked, pointing to the plate of spiced rice. "What? No," Izzy answered, looking nonplussed. She pushed the plate of food to Stan and handed him the fork, which he took graciously. "Energy, man," Stan justified to Moss as he sat. "Split it?" "No," Moss answered, too struck by the shift to say anything else. Stan sat and worked at the food voraciously. "Safe to say your life has changed," Izzy joked nervously, pulling a piece of sleeve which stuck out from under the wrist of her armor and rubbing it between her thumb and forefinger. "You are not wrong," Moss said, wearing a weak smile. He could not even begin to tell her how much his life had changed. "Where's Gibbs?" she asked. "He came with you, right?" The guilt hung on his every word. "I'll tell you later." Chapter 12. They strode through the forum, a Burbsack officer and two obvious city dwellers turning more than a few heads. Izzy led them to a corridor between two buildings as Stan snickered. "What?" Moss asked. Stan smirked. "You catch the name of that bar?" "Lewd and Lascivious," Moss answered with a shrug. He had never been, but knew Gibbs would go there with some of his co-workers from time to time. "Yeah," Stan laughed. "A sports bar with girls in hot pants dancing on the tables? You fucking bubs don't even know the meaning of lewd and lascivious." Having seen the long-legged spinners even from the outside, Moss had to agree, and began to speak before Izzy hissed, "Will you two hush up?" They approached a concrete pillbox with the Burbsack seal painted on a thick metal door. "Entry code 610, Moss heard her command in his mind, and the barcode on her name tag was scanned before the door hissed open. "There's a lot of these side entrances, so the average employee doesn't see people being dragged very far," Izzy explained as she led them down concrete steps whose yellow paint had been worn off over time. Light bulbs in metal cages illuminated the corridor, which seemed to stretch on as far as Moss could see. They walked a while before Izzy spoke again. "Ferocious Stan," she began respectfully. "You should take the lead here. There will be a guard stationed as we round the next corner." "Right," he said, and stepped in front of them, cracking his knuckles with dramatic flair. They stepped past a line of demarcation spray painted on the floor, the blue beehive shield logo of Burbsack on the near side, and the handcuffed scorpion pincer emblem of the Carcer Corporation on the other. "Thank you, Iz," Moss said. She turned sorrowful eyes on him as he heard her neural command, "Security Order 19? That was it. He wasn't surprised, only disappointed. "Listen, Moss," she began, but his hand was already reaching for the weapon at his side. It was not instinct as it had been with the biker. It was a calculated move. He knew how much he had asked of her, how much she would have had to give up to help them. He also knew how much it would help her Burbsack career if she stopped them. He had hoped that she wouldn't betray them, but he understood why she had. His heart broke as he pressed his thumbnail against the switch, ensuring it was set to non-lethal. Her eyes went wide with disbelief as he raised the weapon, pointing to the break in her armor at the shoulder. He knew the wiring would distribute the shock. Stan had taught him as much. The lights in the hallway turned red, and she had time to say, "No!" as he pulled the trigger. Stan wheeled back around with his revolver and aimed as an overhead speaker blared, "Security alert!" The world was immediately flooded in red light. Moss found himself saying, "I'm sorry," as the shock hit his oldest friend, who crumpled instantly into his arms. His eyes burned and his face contorted in anger, disappointment, and fear. He lay her down and turned to look at Stan with his weapon pointed at them. Moss snarled, "It's dealt with." Stan lowered his weapon. "I'm sorry." But Stan's words hardly registered. "Me fucking too," Moss exclaimed, his words muffled in his own ears, drowned out by the alarms. "We have to move," Stan ordered. "I know it," he said through gritted teeth, his last conversation with Gibbs replaying in his mind. He looked at Izzy, her shallow breaths causing her armor to rise and fall ever so slightly. He pulled the name tag from her armor and wiped the tears from his face as he stood, accepting that he could trust no one but himself in this world. "Let's do something good," he told Stan, and they hurried down the hallway. A guard turned to meet them at an open door at the end of the hall, and Stan brought the butt of his weapon down so hard on the man his helmet shattered, sending him crashing to the floor. Moss held his weapon forward as they continued down more corridors. "We've been compromised. Meet us at the front for extraction," Moss heard Stan command in his mind. "Already en route," Judy answered. Moss had watched this version of events play out on the hologram, and knew they would make their way to the holding cells before leaving through the front door where the rest of the crew would be waiting. Time was paramount now, as Carcer would be mobilizing men and drudges to converge on this location. 2 more guards awaited them around the next corner. One knelt, opening a box containing an auto-assembling turret. Stan's weapon boomed in the contained space, and the man on the ground was sprayed with the blood of his cohort as Moss pulled his own trigger with fury, the first few shots spraying electric blue all over his armor before finding a gap. He convulsed violently and crunched against the ground before he had a chance to activate the turret. Blood pooled dark crimson onto the hard floor, and Moss stared a moment at the 2 men, one living, one forever dead. Once a month in the burb, handlers made a special show of putting chickens in with 2152's mascot Tiger. Employees would gather to watch the beasts stalk the helpless birds before turning them into plumes of feathers and viscera. Next to Stan, moving toward their destination, Moss felt a kinship with the animals. He could not wait for the next guards, his finger poised on his trigger. All sympathy he had felt for them lay 2 hallways back, taking shallow breaths. He nearly pulled the trigger once more as the 2 stepped through another door to the holding cells and figures appeared before them, standing over the bodies of 6 guards. He had to blink hard to catch his brain up to what he was seeing. Ina stood poised with an auto rifle pointed directly at them, a naked man cowering behind her. One windowless cell door was open and faced a bank of computer monitors displaying images from inside the cells and around the facility. Stan was already shaking his head at the words. Ina laughed as she reloaded her rifle. "Ah, my dipshits in shining armor." "This him?" the man asked as he pulled some clothes for himself out of a security guard's locker and began to dress hurriedly, having to try several times before feeding his arm into one of the sleeves. Ina was still dressed the way Moss had seen her when they had met, and what Stan had realized now dawned on him too. Her garbled message had not said that she was captured, but that she was going on the rescue mission herself. "Chicken thumbs?" Moss asked the Caucasian man, who appeared to be in his late 20s, was slightly overweight, and bore the fresh purpling-yellow bruises of someone who had recently been asked some aggressive questions by Carcer Corp jailers. "The one and only?" Chicken Thumbs said, spreading his arms wide. His body moved with jerky, uneven motions as he reached down to pick up one of the guns from the floor. "Good thing you all got here when you did. I was a few hours away from a one-way trip to Carcer City." "Hey, fuckwits," Ina interrupted. "People are coming to kill us, so perhaps we can save the introductions and platitudes for later?" "Yeah," Stan agreed as gunfire illuminated one of the screens. "Cavalry's here." They stepped over the bodies as they moved back into the passageways. Lighted exit signs guided their way, and they heard yelling from around another corner. Stan and Ina led the way, with the other 2 dogging their steps. Ina peeked around the corner. "3 more, she announced, with a turret. "I'll take the left?" Stan asked, and Ina rolled her eyes and shot him a devilish grin as she pulled the pin from a heat-seeking grenade. She sent it bounding down the hallway, small pins firing out one after another to seek the bodies of the guards. They heard, "Shit!" before a white light and loud explosive bang filled the space. No sooner than it happened did Ina and Stan round the corner, the auto rifle and revolver singing their songs of death in unison. Moss and Chicken Thumbs followed, but were left useless. Where he had felt like a hunter moments before, Moss was instantly relegated to a support role with the 2 now leading them. Though he didn't want to kill, neither did he want to do nothing. "It's not much further," Ina told them as they stepped through the gore. "There will be a lot more at the front, so you 2 asshats may have to actually do something." Her words stung, but Moss simply nodded. Chicken Thumbs stepped through the blood and slipped, splaying his legs before he splashed to the ground. "Ew!" he said as he tried to right himself, sliding again and landing face first into more of the warm, sticky red liquid. "You may have to find a new job," Ina said, shaking her head with disgust as he stood, his clothes clinging to his body. Trying to wipe the blood from his eyes simply smeared it more around his pudgy face. The guilt Moss had felt about bringing Izzy, the person who betrayed them to the authorities, was somewhat diminished in the face of CT's seeming ineptitude. As they moved further, Stan sidled up to Moss. "Quit hugging the wall like that," he said, pulling Moss toward the center. "One of those turrets starts firing, lots of bullets will slide along and make short work of your side." "Oh, okay," Moss said weakly, realizing once again how truly far he was from being the tiger. "Thanks," he said, "for everything." "I got you," Stan smiled. "Just remember, you got an important place in all this." Moss would remember that moment for the rest of his days. They all huddled as they neared another corner. "Lucky Thutico doesn't like straight lines," Chicken Thumbs observed. "Idiot! They are trying to make blind spots and choke points. There are going to be a lot of bodies around this," Ina said, not masking her derision. "Wish you would save that grenade," Stan said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Stanley, sometimes it's like you don't know me at all," Ina said with a crooked smile, producing another grenade from beneath her jacket. "Once this hits, we all pop out and lay it down." "Right," Moss said, making circles with his thumb on the side of his weapon. "Let's see if you're worth all this trouble," Ina added, making Moss more resolute. He was going to prove his worth to them, show them that he wasn't just some useless bub. "Isn't there some cover we can use?" Chicken Thumbs pleaded, his words running counter to his grim visage. "Do you see any fucking cover, CT?" Ina asked. "We have to get the fuck out of here." Ina pulled the pin and tossed the grenade. The guard sounded prepared this time, hollering, "Incoming!" The narrow corridor was filled with light and sound once more, and bullets and beams filled the small space as they stepped around the corner. It seemed to happen faster than Moss's mind could compute as he pulled the trigger of his weapon, sending blast after blast into the group of 7 guards. They fired at the group, who crouched behind mobile auto-folding metal walls. Chunks of wall and ceiling exploded and rained down, filling the space with rocks and dust as Stan bobbed and weaved toward the group. Moss watched as the only guard who had not lowered his visor looked in shock as the massive man kicked the shield, sending 2 flying backward. Ina and Moss let loose a barrage as the other guards turned to watch their compatriots. Moss hit one in the helmet, seeing the Regnad display within the visor. Ina's rifle made short work of 2 more, while one man seemed to be merely cowering in terror. A loud crack sent chills down Moss's spine as Stan spun the head of one guard to face backward. The other guard on the ground leveled his weapon at the same time as Stan stood. The guard fired a shot which grazed Stan's shoulder as he moved down the hall. Enraged, Stan pounced and knocked the gun loose before bringing a fist down on the guard's unprotected face. Blood cascaded as he hit the man again and again with a rage Moss had never before witnessed. Moss turned too slowly as the last remaining guard took aim and fired with a trembling hand. Simultaneously, a shot rang out from behind him, killing the guard as Moss's vision went white with pain. He looked down to see his shoe split open, blood and smoke pouring out. Moss collapsed in pain as Ina made sure the guards were no longer a threat. She turned to see Moss clutching his foot. "Shit," she muttered as she made her way to him. "You all right?" "Got shot," Moss told her, though he knew she was aware. He had never known pain, never experienced anything like the firefight he had just witnessed. The VR games he had played, simulating modern war, were nothing like the carnage before him, and the simulated gunshots, nothing like the excruciating feeling emanating from his foot. Ina offered him a hand and pulled him to his feet. She produced a small tube from her pocket and pressed a button with her thumb as she placed it against his neck. The stim injector worked instantly, subsiding the pain and making Moss feel as though he could burst through the front door and take on Karser Corp himself. "Thank you," he said genuinely. "No worries, still more to do." "Can you walk?" she asked, her fierce eyes looking right into his. "Yeah," he said, and stamped the foot, which produced a squishing sound but no longer pained him. He looked down to examine the wounded appendage, and realized a good chunk of the side was gone. He knew it was the drugs which caused him not to care, but he wasn't bothered by that fact either. "Clear up top. Rosetta's working on the front door for you all, but we'll have company shortly," Byrne related. "Got 2 squads headed your way," Gibbs informed them. Byrne added, "They'll be on us right quick." "We're clear and headed to you," Ina told them. She reloaded her auto rifle and said aloud, "Let's move!" As Stan had predicted, Moss felt little remorse as he stepped over the people who would have been happy to kill him and had shot his foot. The metallic scent of blood mixed with acrid smoke, gunpowder, dust, seared flesh, and plastic filled his nose. He watched Stan rise to his feet, his eyes dark like that of a shark, and his posture twisted predatorily. Splatter gleamed against his pale skin. His mesh ripped where the guard had thrashed against him. "I was an engineer," Moss thought aloud. "In a past life," Ina replied, the barrel of her rifle still seeping a trail of smoke. She knelt and quickly wrapped his foot in a roll of bandage Moss had not even seen her produce. "Got that right," Moss agreed, and one side of Ina's mouth turned upward slightly. "To the front," Stan ordered, his light affability replaced with a coldness to match his appearance. "Still can't believe you thought I needed rescuing," Ina mocked as the group made their way up the hallway toward the front of the structure. Moss marveled at the size and scope of the tunnels which led to such a small building. "Communication was shit, got bad intel, made a call," Stan stated. "You must be real fun at parties," Moss joked as though speaking to Gibbs rather than a murderous pseudo-stranger. Stan snarled, "Like you've ever been to a fucking party." "Cut him some slack, first time he's been dope, no doubt," Ina defended. Stan snorted. "And people wonder why I don't touch the stuff," he said under his breath, but loud enough to be heard. "I like regular Stan more," Moss couldn't help but joke. Stan spun on him and scruffed him by the shirt, lifting him so his toes just touched the ground. "Ferocious Stan is all that's keeping you and chicken shit alive," he hissed into Moss's face. "I hate that nickname," Chicken Thumb said, cutting the tension. "Gibbs used a veto on his," Moss joked as Stan lowered him to the ground, wearing a face of disgust which Moss ignored. Chicken Thumbs raised an eyebrow. "Who's Gibbs?" "Hey, dingbats! Can we get the fuck out of here before Stan does Carcer's job for them?" Ina said as she began to walk again. The hallway opened into a large anteroom, with security office on one side, large glass windows looking into the space. A huge metal door, large enough for a truck to be backed into, was set into the concrete. A solitary guard squatted at a panel next to the door, attempting to counter whatever Rosetta was doing on the other side. Stan was on him before he knew what hit him, slamming the man's face so hard into the door that his helmet cracked and visor split. "Saved us a bullet." Chicken Thumbs shrugged as Moss watched the body slump. Moss noted how little protection the armor offered. He wondered if it served more to give them an intimidating appearance than to actually protect them. He decided he would wait to ask, the initial rush of the drugs having worn off. "Thanks, guys," Rosetta said. "I'll get it now." An eerie calm descended as they waited for the door to open, Stan pacing impatiently and Ina checking and reloading her weapon. "How'd they get you?" Moss asked Chicken Thumbs to fill the silence, his voice reverberating down the hall. The young man chuckled miserably. "On my way to meet you, I was stopped by BurbSec. Tried to talk my way out of it the way I've seen her do 100 times, but they didn't buy it," he explained. "You were probably shaking like a fucking leaf and sweating like a stuck pig," Ina chided. "Yeah, I stick out like a sore," he began, his voice rising with the joke. "Don't you fucking say it, bloodbath," Ina interrupted, but Chicken Thumbs smirked anyway. "Got it," Rosetta informed them as the massive door thumped and began to slide open, revealing her working at a panel on the outside. Byrne and Judy had their backs to them, pointing weapons to the sky. Moss took a breath of the clean air as it poured into the hallway. It smelled like the rain. No sooner than Moss had taken the one free breath than the dark sky became dotted with approaching Carcer guards, the flashing red lights from their drones announcing their arrival. Moss knew what happened next unfolded in mere seconds, but the stim slowed time as the action began. Byrne sent a line into the air, one guard's legs falling to the earth as his upper half went careening into a building in an explosion which shook the structure. Judy sprayed the sky with what amounted to fireworks, the bursts of cascading sparks causing more guards to recalculate their descent. 2 were able to land, firing shots which scattered Judy and Byrne. Ina and Stan ran out into the open, the auto rifle screaming shots which felled one of the guards. The other paused just long enough to point in the direction of Moss, who lifted his weapon in what felt like slow motion. He heard the pop of the weapon in the distance, and felt the blood spray his face. He gritted his teeth, and he felt his thumb move as Rosetta's head jerked to the wall in a crimson splat. He pulled the trigger and felt the recoil this time as the blue electric streamed toward the man, blasting open his armor. The second shot exploded his chest open in a mixture of smoke and carnage. He knew what he had done. He knew he had ended a life. After all his protestations, Stan had been right. He felt no guilt for the man, only sorrow for Rosetta, the woman he had assured this wouldn't happen. Weapons fired and alarms rang out as he knelt next to her body, red streaks pouring down over the tattoos on her neck. "No!" Ina shouted as she ran back and over to Rosetta. She clutched the body for just a moment, her face angry and inconsolable. She turned and looked at him with eyes that pierced his soul before darting back into the fray, screaming a war cry. As one Carcer officer landed, she grabbed the muzzle of his weapon immediately, pulling him stumbling forward. She spun him to face the oncoming fire from one of his allies, and he was riddled with bullets meant for Ina. She was covered in blood as she returned fire, making innumerable men pay for the death of her friend. One of his allies cheek weapon sting, and he felt his thumb move as Rosetta's head began. Burns sent a line into the air, one guard's legs falling to the earth as his upper half went careening into a building in an explosion which shook the structure. Judy sprayed the sky with what amounted to fireworks, the bursts of cascading sparks causing more guards to recalculate their descent. 2 were able to land, firing shots which scattered Judy and Byrne. Ina and Stan ran out into the open, the auto rifle screaming shots which felled one of the guards. The other paused just long enough to point in the direction of Moss, who lifted his weapon in what felt like slow motion. He heard the pop of the weapon in the distance, and felt the blood spray his face. He gritted his teeth, and he felt his thumb move as Rosetta's head jerked to the wall in a crimson splat. He pulled the trigger and felt the recoil this time as the blue electric streamed toward the man, blasting open his armor. The second shot exploded his chest open in a mixture of smoke and carnage. He knew what he had done. He knew he had ended a life. After all his protestations, Stan had been right. He felt no guilt for the man, only sorrow for Rosetta, the woman he had assured this wouldn't happen. Weapons fired and alarms rang out as he knelt next to her body, red streaks pouring down over the tattoos on her neck. "No!" Ina shouted as she ran back and over to Rosetta. She clutched the body for just a moment, her face angry and inconsolable. She turned and looked at him with eyes that pierced his soul before darting back into the fray, screaming a war cry. As one Carcer officer landed, she grabbed the muzzle of his weapon immediately, pulling him stumbling forward. She spun him to face the oncoming fire from one of his allies, and he was riddled with bullets meant for Ina. She was covered in blood as she returned fire, making innumerable men pay for the death of her friend. Moss could not move. He was immobilized by all of it. Seeing a new friend die, killing someone, it was all too much. 2 days earlier he had been an engineer, a cog in the machine, a nobody. Now he was something else, something he couldn't even identify. He looked down at Rosetta's body, feeling like he might throw up. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to her. Her blank eyes stared into space. Chicken Thumbs pulled him to his feet. As he stood, he saw one more Carcer officer take aim, and Moss felt his arm move lethargically. Exhaustion, terror, and regret was keeping his body from obeying his brain. He simply watched in stunned silence as the man pointed his weapon directly at him, poised to fire death. The officer's head exploded, blood spraying into the lighted night sky. Moss turned slightly to see Judy, weapon smoking in hand, give a slight nod. "Second round closing in," Gibbs informed them as they hurried to Byrne and Judy. "Here," Burns said as he strapped a drone pack to Moss, metal arms wrapping themselves around his torso, clipping together to form a booster at his chest. "It'll get you out of here." Judy screamed something at him and spit on the ground, but he was too sorrowful to hear or care about the insult. The slight engine on his back whirred to life. "Stakes in the wind," Seti ordered, and Moss lifted into the sky. All the members of the group flew in different directions as Moss's stomach lurched. In the solitude of the night sky, he was left with his thoughts. Izzie's face as she realized he was going to shoot her replayed in his mind before becoming Rosetta. The sound of the alarm, the blood, Stan prowling, being shot, the drugs, the sizzle of the guard's chest. It was too much to bear. More had happened in the last hour than in Moss's previous 19 years. The drone shifted and buckled in the wind. A thunderclap. Light misting rain like hundreds of people spitting in his face before opening up, giving way to heavy rain. Every drop slapping him, as if the world knew the enormity of what he had just experienced. The lights from the city grew in the distance as the burbs disappeared. He turned his head as if to hide from it all, and retched into the darkness. Chapter 13. Moss landed in a puddle, people turning to look at him in surprise, their eyes wide and mouths agape. Personal pack drones were expensive and required an even more costly registration and license. They were therefore uncommon, particularly with people as bedraggled as Moss appeared. He slumped to the ground, crawling under an awning in front of a 24-hour palm screen repair shop. The ride had sapped any remaining strength, and he leaned against the glass storefront, wrapping his arms around his knees. A hand appeared in his vision. "Let's go home," he heard Ina say. The word home rang false. He didn't feel as if he had a home anywhere in the world. He listened to the thumping of the rain on the awning. "Moss," Ina said, her voice soft, almost sweet. He looked up, her wet hair glowing, her eyes big and kind. "Shit happens. We all know the risk." She paused a moment, choking down emotions. She knew the risk. The words fell heavy on him, and Ina tried to recover. "You did good, but we have to go. That gauze had clotting gel, but that foot's going to be a problem if we don't get you some proper help." He nodded, happy it was she who found him. Her jacket opened slightly as she helped him to his feet, exposing her bare breast through the mesh bodysuit. The curvature was a welcomed distraction, albeit fleeting. He couldn't tell if she didn't notice or didn't care as his eyes wandered up to her face. In a weak voice, he said, "Okay, we can go." "I know it," she replied, obviously resenting the implication. Not knowing what else to say, he muttered, "Sorry. Let's go," she commanded. They walked the lighted streets, both completely soaked through. Moss hated the feeling, the wetness bothering him more than the foot leaving dark streaks in the puddles. They weaved through neon-lit streets and alleys, the darkness and rain doing nothing to deter the denizens of the city from going about their business. "This is all a pretty rude awakening for you?" Ina asked, pulling her hair back with her hands to wring it out and get it out of her eyes. "Yeah," Moss answered, needing to constantly steady himself with a hand on her shoulder. "I just wish I had known." The admission pained him. "Why?" Ina asked, and the question surprised him. I could have prepared," he fumbled, wiping water from his face. "You think anything in the burbs could have prepared you for tonight?" Looking around the unfamiliar streets, cold faces and dangerous streets, he sullenly admitted, "No. Durako doesn't teach classes on fighting the power," she joked with a slight smile. He joined her in the smile and added, "Fighting the Power 101. "Right," she chuckled, and cupped her hands to her mouth, blowing into them for warmth. "You will get used to it, to all of it." "I'm not sure I want to," he told her, feeling at ease with her, as he had with Stan. He understood why his family liked this crew. "I get that," she sympathized, "but important things require sacrifice, in every meaning of that word." "Sure," he agreed, "but I imagine you've had your whole life to ready yourself for that. I've had 3 days. "I didn't have my whole life," Ina began, but trailed off. Moss didn't speak, hoping she would continue to talk. She did. "I was a normal kid. Came for money, really, if you can believe it. Dad kicked me and Mom out when he realized relief aids don't talk back. He had the kind of connections which meant the law would work in his favor. Child support, alimony, all the mandatory minimum. Cut us out of his life with little more than a couple of bucks being transferred from some forgotten account once a month. We made do the best we could. Mom waited tables, and I fell in with the kind of kids who know how to make a quick buck. Those kids made me smart, tough, taught me how to survive. I needed it, too. Mom got killed in a holdup. Drunk asshole wanted to steal a pie. A fucking pie. Cook wanted to play at being a hero, and Mom tried to step in. Some good it did her. "You try to go back to your dad?" Moss asked. "Tried. But he had as much interest in being a father as I did in kowtowing to the prick who had thrown Mom out. So I got the urchins together and we robbed him. Foolish kid idea, I know it now. He had the money to get a bounty on us, and I learned how Carcer does things. When I got out, my former friends wanted nothing to do with me, blamed me for bringing the heat down on them. I was alone, so I got smart. Learned how to hack, steal, learned what trucks the big companies wouldn't miss. I had a fence wrapped around my finger so I could get the best deals. But he got wise when I wouldn't put out and made a threat. I wasn't gonna whore, and when he figured that out, he finked. Got some thugs to try and learn me. I gave as good as I got at first, but it was 4 against 1, and eventually they got the better of me," she said. She paused a moment, seeming lost in thought, and Moss wondered how much of the story was true. She had seemed so tough to him, and he had a hard time picturing anyone being able to take her on. They trudged forward, the constant rain pounding Moss down, making it harder for them to move. She squinted at him. Grimy found me, broken and bruised as he came out of a haberdashery, as you would expect. But you might not expect that he took pity on me, bringing me to a safe house to get patched. She smiled then, with a glint in her eye. The same glint which Stan had when he was telling Moss about his past. That's when I met Byrne and Sandra. They honed my skills. Showed me that what I was good at could be put to use. That I could do some good in this grim fucking world. I wanted to help. I craved it. I wanted the men like my father, the people who valued money above all things, to pay for their greed, to see that the people they treated as little more than drudges were real, could have power all their own. This cause, however you see it, that your family helped shape, means everything to me. To all of us. To Rosetta. She let the name hang, eyes downcast. Moss didn't know how long they had known each other, or what their relationship had been, but he could tell she was taking the loss hard. You ever go back for the fence? Moss asked, not wanting to dwell on the death for which he blamed himself. Ina's head dipped slightly with the shame of it. Yes, she said. I went back for him with my new skills and a few augments. I released a fury on him I didn't realize was in me, but... She fell silent once more. Moss matched the silence as they stood before the apartment complex, not entering. I had never seen Byrne so disappointed. Really? He seems like the type who wouldn't mind, Moss said, and Ina shook her head. No. He said petty revenge was beneath us. He explained that we were part of something bigger, and to risk getting caught over a personal vendetta was just hogwash. I can see that, Moss said as they entered the building. Point being, I may have had more than a few days, but not really my whole life to prepare, she concluded. Moss let out a little chuckle. Fair enough, Moss said, gripping the banister hard to ascend the stairs. When they entered the hidden apartment, Grimy rushed over, seeing the blood seeping from Moss's foot. He gestured for Moss to move to a couch. Join the club? Gibbs mocked in a whisper, glancing toward Stan laying on one of the cots, one massive bloody paw hanging over the edge. Couldn't let you have all the fun, Moss said with a pained smile as he moved through the room, blood and water dripping and pooling on the floor. Gibbs couldn't hide the sorrow on his face. You all right? Yeah, Moss forced, pulling the soaking trench coat from his body with great effort. Liar, Gibbs said, and one corner of his mouth turned up. Moss chuckled. Yeah. If you two could keep the prattling to a minimum, said from a dark corner, gripping a bottle, his face momentarily illuminated by the flare of a cigarette. Sorry, Gibbs said. Moss had not even noticed him. Don't mind him, Grimy said as he cut away at the wet bandage. He gets morose after a job. After a loss like that. He has every right to be miserable, Moss said quietly. You all do. Grimy didn't look at him, didn't give any reaction, and Moss stared at the cables dangling on the ceiling. Dust covered their tops and spiderwebs undulated slowly. This is pretty bad, he heard Grimy say, though he didn't look down. I can patch it, but it may be better to take him to see the farrier. Moss glanced over as Byrne rose and entered his field of vision. He could barely make out the old man's grizzled face under the brim of his hat. You want an upgrade? What? Moss asked. He pointed a finger at Moss's legs. New foot. Maybe two for good measure. He's more machine now than man, Gibbs said in a tone Moss recognized as an impression. Moss began to answer, but the door to the apartment slammed open. Judy snarled, rocketing toward Moss. You piece of shit! Ina moved between them quickly, holding up a hand. What? She asked, though Judy's angry eyes were fixed on Moss. His fucking girlfriend got Rosetta killed. I told you we couldn't trust them, Judy said, pointing an accusing finger at Byrne. Ina kept shifting and moving to try and hold her friend's wild eyes. What do you mean? Stan said the other bubs set off the alarms, Judy hissed. No, Ina said, the word ringing out like a shot, and Moss's face wrinkled with confusion. What would you know about it? Judy seethed. More than you. I was in the fucking room, Jude, Ina said, her voice raising. A guard pressed the alarm button before I could take them all down. What? Moss asked in horror, guilt coursing through him. Judy stopped to listen as well, taking a deep breath. Stan peered over from his cot. I couldn't get them all down in time, and one set off the alarm when I got to CT. I watched him press the button myself. About the same time, though, the cell doors unlocked. When I saw you guys, I assumed it was you who hacked the doors, Ina explained as Moss's hands went numb. No, Moss uttered. He didn't want to believe it. Couldn't believe it. Visions of Izzy's face as he raised the weapon played in his head. He had betrayed her, not the other way around. He had shot her. To protect her, he tried to rationalize. Stan wouldn't have given her time to explain as soon as the alarm had gone off. He would have killed her. Gibbs moved laboriously over to Moss. So, what happened? He asked as Judy and Ina continued to bicker. Moss explained the series of events as he had seen them. You did what you thought was right, Gibbs assured him. But his words lacked conviction. She'll never forgive me, Moss whimpered. She shouldn't. She will, Gibbs said. She knows you. I don't, Moss said, all the guilt and confusion he had felt in the past few days finding a home in 2 words. Byrne, who had been watching the whole thing unfold in silence, turned and spoke to Moss again. Let's get you to the farrier, he said. That would be best, Grimy agreed, and Moss wondered if he meant for medical reasons or to get him out of there. Moss knew he had been listening while pretending to focus solely on his foot. He knew that even after Ina's defense of the situation, they would blame him for Rosetta's death. Even Ina, who was being kind to Moss about it, was very obviously upset and trying to hide her feelings. Yeah, Moss agreed, more interested in leaving the room than the prospect of cybernetics. They left the room in a hurry. I know what you're thinking, young'un, Byrne began, and Moss listened in sullen silence. We needed to come. You must understand that. The second that button was pressed, Ina was up a creek, and if we hadn't come, we'd have lost 2 instead of 1. You're gonna feel the pangs of guilt, I know it. But Ina and Chicken Thumbs are breathing now because we came. Carson moved when that button got hit. You made a tough call, and it was the right one, so don't sit in sorrow. Moss felt the truth of his words. He knew Byrne was right, but the image of Rosetta dead stared at him every time he closed his eyes. And your friend, Byrne added. You shot her to save her. Timing fucked you, no getting around it. But I'll work with you to get her out, if she still wants it. Thank you, Moss said, taking some small solace in that idea. He imagined her waking up, feeling the betrayal Moss had felt when he thought she turned on the alarms. 1 leg or 2? Byrne asked, and though Moss knew it was a tactic for distracting him, he was grateful. Just the 1, I think, he answered. All right, he said, hailing a cab electronically which descended out of the rain almost as soon as it was ordered. Moss was leery as they moved toward the vehicle. Is it safe to fly so soon? Should be, Byrne answered. Lots of traffic at night, and we are heading away from where we came, he explained. That's good. Moss breathed a sigh of relief. Not all good news, Byrne said, lighting a cigarette in the confinement of the cab as it took off. We all wore scrambling outfits to hide from the cameras, but Thudico Techs will be working with the footage. They'll figure it was us before too long, and they'll set a new bounty. It'll be harder to make our next move. Moss nodded. He knew his life had changed. Knew he had killed a person. Become a criminal. But the reality of spending his whole life on the run and looking over his shoulder terrified him. Why didn't they warn me? Moss asked. And when Byrne didn't answer, he continued. My parents, my grandma, someone. They could have left me a message somewhere, so I could know what to do, what my place is. I feel like I didn't know any of them at all. Like I'm chasing shadows. No, worse, like I'm chasing shadows in a dream. I mean, my dad left you a message, but not me. That's hard. Byrne turned to look at him through the eerie smoke. I say, he didn't leave you a message? No, but I just assumed. Moss started, but Byrne held up a hand, ash cascading down his hand. You assume, and you prattle, but I need you to listen and hear, Byrne said. You got caught up in this and it's been moving fast. It won't always be that way, and in the downtime you need to be smart. Watch the world, wait for opportunities.
You have a long way to go, and I'll help you get there. Everyone back there will. Even Judy, despite how they treat you now. This crew, we are a family."
Moss nodded. "I've already begun to see that."
"Now, you want to see what your dad said?"
Byrne asked, his one eye piercing Moss. "Yes, please," Moss answered, trying to sound calm, unsuccessfully.
"All right," Byrne said. "You want me to project it here? Means you won't have privacy from me."
"You haven't watched it?" Moss's eyes went wide. Byrne snorted.
"Weren't mine to watch."
"It's okay," Moss told him, so happy to know that there was a video, that he didn't care who saw it. Byrne tapped at his palm, and once again the face of Moss's father was before him. "Hey, Mossy," he said, turning from the camera bashfully. He was much younger and less frazzled than in the other videos. "Seems trite to say this, but I guess if you're watching this, it means they got me. I'm sure you have 1,000,001 questions. They will all be answered in due time. But know that your mom, Grandma, and I have always been proud of you. And know you will continue to make us proud. If you are watching this, it also means you got out and found Byrne. He may seem like an asshole, but he is a good man, and will help you any way he can." At this, Byrne smiled almost imperceptibly under his beard. Moss had never heard his father swear, and it was unnatural to Moss's ears, but he smiled too. "He and your grandma helped me get free, and it brings me great joy to think that they've done the same for you. Thudiko is evil, kiddo. You may be grappling with that, but trust me when I say it. More than making willing slaves of their employees, they have plans to do worse. And I'm helping them. That's why I need to do what I'm doing now, and why you need to find a different life. The corporate path you left behind was helping to oppress the world, and working with Byrne can help to free the world instead. I wish I could have told you this in person, that I could have explained it to you and helped you to adjust. But I'm too deep and you are still so young. I look at you now and I can't bring myself to corrupt you with the truth. I hope you understand, and don't hate me for it." "I don't," Moss whispered, his eyes full as his father kept talking. "We're just trying to do what's best for you. I really hope you understand that now. If you still have questions about what you are now part of, ask Byrne. He is here for you since I can't be. I love you," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I hope you never have to see this, but we will meet again." The transmission ended, and Moss could not speak. He had needed that, and it had come at just the right moment. For the first time since Ina knocked on his door, he was comfortable with his decision to leave the burb and help these people. The way his father had spoken about Byrne made Moss feel as if he knew him too. He let out a long breath, not able to recall the last one he took. "Thank you," he said, and Byrne nodded.
"You have questions for me?"
he asked. "I'm sure I will have more, but can you tell me about Thudiko? I know the history they teach us, but I feel as though I need to understand more," Moss said. It was clear to him that everyone, including his father, hated the company. But Moss had been brought up by it and needed to understand more.
"What do you know now?"
Byrne asked. "What they taught us? Well, the company was founded by Wesley Grayson and named for a fantasy novel he loved. The startup did agricultural genetics and some robotics," Moss began, trying to remember what he had been told in his company history class. Byrne lit another cigarette, and the smoke instantly filled the space. Moss continued. They created a plant which was supposed to be able to feed the world and was therefore given the name Prophet Root. It replaced many traditional crops around the world, but eventually a bacterium spread over the plant. Treated, it was still edible, but it killed all the farmers, caused the Great Pandemic, and drove all of the survivors into the cities, where they had started to set up perimeters to keep the spread at bay. As he spoke, he tried to read Byrne's face, tried to get a sense of whether anything he had been told was true. Byrne was unreadable, though, his face like a blank screen. Moss kept talking, watching the older man. Thudiko built the burbs and drudges to give people an opportunity to stay employed and do work outside the city walls from safety.
That's the gist of it?
Byrne asked, and turned slightly so Moss was reflected in the plate which covered one of the man's eye sockets. Yes, Moss answered, shifting uncomfortably, as though he was giving a presentation for which he hadn't studied.
Nothing about the wars? The relationship with the colonies?
Byrne pressed, sounding annoyed before sending 2 plumes of smoke from his nostrils. Not about the wars, but the colonies, sure. I know we produce so much P-root to send off-world in exchange for what they mine, he said.
All right,
Byrne said.
Well, what they tell you ain't too far from the truth. Sin of a mission, more like. You ever question why they can stop the spread with misters and treat the root to be ate, but it still ain't safe to leave the cities? Or the fact that profit can't be grown off-world? Or how about that they had the burbs all built up and ready to go before the bacteria?
I hadn't thought about any of that, Moss admitted. What does it mean?
It means Thudico knew what they were doing. They wanted to drive E8
more, but can you tell me about Thudico? I know the history they teach us, but I feel as though I need to understand more, Moss said. It was clear to him that everyone, including his father, hated the company. But Moss had been brought up by it and needed to understand more.
What do you know now?
Byrne asked. What they taught us? Well, the company was founded by Wesley Grayson and named for a fantasy novel he loved. The startup did agricultural genetics and some robotics. Moss began, trying to remember what he had been told in his company history class. Byrne lit another cigarette, and the smoke instantly filled the space. Moss continued. They created a plant which was supposed to be able to feed the world and was therefore given the name Profit Root. It replaced many traditional crops around the world, but eventually a bacterium spread over the plant. Treated, it was still edible, but it killed all the farmers, caused the Great Pandemic, and drove all of the survivors into the cities, where they had started to set up perimeters to keep the spread at bay. As he spoke, he tried to read Byrne's face, tried to get a sense of whether anything he had been told was true. Byrne was unreadable, though, his face like a blank screen. Moss kept talking, watching the older man. Thudico built the burbs and drudges to give people an opportunity to stay employed and do work outside the city walls from safety.
That's the gist of it?
Byrne asked, and turned slightly so Moss was reflected in the plate which covered one of the man's eye sockets. Yes, Moss answered, shifting uncomfortably, as though he was giving a presentation for which he hadn't studied.
Nothing about the wars? The relationship with the colonies?
Byrne pressed, sounding annoyed before sending 2 plumes of smoke from his nostrils. Not about the wars, but the colonies, sure. I know we produce so much P-root to send off-world in exchange for what they mine, he said.
All right,
Byrne said.
Well, what they tell you ain't too far from the truth. Sin of a mission, more like. You ever question why they can stop the spread with misters and treat the root to be ate, but it still ain't safe to leave the cities? Or the fact that profit can't be grown off-world? Or how about that they had the burbs all built up and ready to go before the bacteria?
I hadn't thought about any of that, Moss admitted. What does it mean?
It means Thudico knew what they were doing. They wanted to drive everyone into the cities, into their waiting arms. Drive them all off the land so the whole planet could be one big corporate farm for them. When the old government tried to stop them, they greased enough palms to get BA City to succeed, and once they did, every city followed suit, leaving nothing but bought and paid for local governments. Thudico and the rest of the AIC now own the country and all the people within. And since no one can leave, we all get taxed so stupid we have nothing left.
Moss couldn't believe how easy he made it sound. How sad the whole thing was. And the wars? He asked, wanting to know the whole truth now.
Ah, well, as happens with these things, not everyone was happy with a monopoly. Andreas City had walls and misters built, but not the infrastructure to take on all the displaced people. They cried out for jobs and wanted the land claimed by BA City. So they tried to take it, and all of us who didn't work for Thudico were pressed into service by the city government.
Byrne explained. Moss knew there had been wars between the cities, but was never given context for it. He looked out the window at the massive, endless city. How easy he made it sound. How sad the whole thing was. And the wars? He asked, wanting to know the whole truth now.
Ah, well, As happens with these things, not everyone was happy with the monopoly. Andreas City had walls and misters built, but not the infrastructure to take on all the displaced people. They cried out for jobs and wanted the land claimed by B.A. City. So they tried to take it, and all of us who didn't work for Thudico were pressed into service by the city government.
Byrne explained. Moss knew there had been wars between the cities, but was never given context for it. He looked out the window at the massive, endless city below, thinking of all the people who had been affected by the corporate greed. But Thudico must have had drudges built. Why not just send them? Moss asked. Byrne shook his head. Byrne scoffed and waved a hand.
Our lives didn't cost them anything.
Oh, Moss said, taking in the full implication of the words.
So we fought, and we died, and many of us vowed to fight back when we were discharged. A few of us are,
he stated. Moss thought about all the different people brought together for this one cause. An athlete, a Thudico employee, a rich kid turned street urchin, a former soldier, and now him. He felt that he wanted to be a part of this, not just for his father, but for himself, to help the people. He smiled for what felt like the first time in an age. The cab began to descend into a part of the city not made of glass and concrete. Chapter 14. Landing on a patch of dirt, Byrne and Moss exited the cab in a district very different from the one they had left. Ancient drywall and stucco homes topped with corrugated metal layers surrounded them on all sides and above. Scaffolding held more homes aloft above the street. Fused metal and rust joined together like twisted branches. People moved about within, going about their normal business, and once more Moss realized how truly massive this city was. Enormous banks of floodlights served as streetlights. Strings of electrical cable pulled like loose yarn from a ball hung low overhead, hissing and popping, while unattended governmental keys rattled from unchecked lockboxes. Many of the homes had their front walls knocked out, gaping like angry mouths and serving as storefronts. People milled about, and Moss could not tell who was working and who was shopping. Everyone seemed to maintain a sense of personal style, though the clothes were tattered or thinned from too much wear. He was relieved that it was not raining here, but the air was thick, brown smog sitting heavily. It burned his nostrils and mouth to breathe.
"Old Oak,"
Byrne announced.
"This part of the city is cheap and largely unchecked by Carcer. Ecosystem and economy, all its own out here, where most of my brethren from the war ended up. Artists, writers, anyone with an independent spirit, too,"
Byrne said, gesturing to the open spaces. Many served as small art studios filled with paintings, renderings, and what Moss took to be furniture, though it mostly seemed to be form over function. Why not hide out here? Moss thought aloud.
We have places here too, but better to be where the action is. This is where we come to lay real low,
he said as they walked. Whatever Grimy had done seemed to have worked, and Moss was able to walk without much pain.
We have to make a pit stop quick on the way to get you fixed,
Byrne told him. All right, Moss said as they strode forward. He was about to ask a question when his mind was flooded.
Moss, we know you love girls, and we have them. Whatever your taste, we have just the gal for you.
Moss pressed his hands to his ears, but the booming sound didn't stop. Byrne turned to speak, his mouth moving wordlessly under the sound of the ad.
We got fat ones, skinny ones, enhanced or natural, something for all tastes at Bonk City. Just 100 meters from your next left.
It stopped, and Moss tried to shake the sound from his mind. Byrne pointed to a glass oval in a chain-link cage.
I get you.
What? Moss asked.
Hack ad,
Byrne said.
They are illegal, but no one cares to stop them out here.
So what, that thing hacks my implant and targets an ad? Moss asked, though he knew the answer.
You got it. Lots of folks have neural implants of one sort or another, so this type of advertising is popular. People who live here say you eventually tune it out, but we'll get you some blockware.
Thanks, Moss said. For his whole life, the implant did nothing more than sink him to Moss 2 and his hex. But now he was growing to hate it. He didn't like hearing others' commands, communicating without speaking, or the idea that his very mind could be hacked. He blinked and saw Rosetta again, the last person to work on his implant. And for the briefest moment, he wished to go back to his old life. Byrne seemed to read his mind. He placed a wrinkled, vascular hand on Moss's shoulder and squeezed.
Remember what your dad said.
That you're an asshole? Moss joked as an attempt to shift his mind. Byrne snorted a laugh.
Yeah, that,
he said with a smile, and they continued to walk. The knocked-out houses gave way to a commercial area with proper storefronts, still piled with makeshift homes atop. They turned to enter the Talisman Saloon, an old Western-style bar with swinging half-doors leading into a faux wood-paneled room. A tall woman with a bright smile worked behind the bar next to a drudge in a cowboy hat. The waitstaff were all nude with wild, unkempt hair and covered nearly head to toe in tattoos. They seemed unbothered by their own nudity, though Moss felt the need to avert his eyes.
"Byrne!"
Moss heard shouted from behind the bar, and he turned to see the woman moving toward them, bright eyes set into a dark face. Her long hair of tight dreadlocks swayed as she moved, and she wore a fur-lined leather vest buttoned only to her cleavage.
"How the hell you doing, you old so-and-so?"
Byrne waved a dismissive acknowledgement.
"Hey, Joe."
He held up 2 fingers, and she set 2 shot glasses on the bar before her. "Haven't seen you in an age," she said. "And you brought a friend."
"Getting him some new shoes,"
Byrne told her, and she tapped a finger to her nose before pouring whiskey loosely into the glasses, a small amount spilling onto the bar. Byrne gulped down the shots in quick succession and turned to Moss.
"Shot?"
"No, thanks," Moss said.
"Weren't asking,"
he clarified, and Joe refilled the glasses, not bothering with a new one. Byrne handed Moss the drink, which he took down in one swallow before his stomach lurched and he nearly gagged the liquid back up. He coughed and felt the effect instantly, slamming his hand on the bar.
"Thanks,"
he wheezed, to no one in particular.
"We're here to see your boy,"
Byrne told her, sliding his glass across the bar for a refill.
"Oh,"
Joe said, a hint of disappointment in her voice. "Take him, more like?"
"More like,"
Byrne repeated. Joe frowned and asked, "What happened to the girl?"
"Warm food,"
Byrne said, and Moss grimaced at the callousness. His head was swimming and he felt sick, but gulped hard and watched the two in silence. Joe refilled Byrne's cup. "Willis goes with you. I expect you to keep the worms from him," Joe said, pointing a threatening finger at Byrne. They were speaking casually, but Moss could hear the fear in her words. Byrne nodded slightly.
"Do my best."
"Do better than your best. You owe me," she stated as she put the whiskey bottle to her lips. "And keep the language to a minimum. I don't want him back in here talking all salty."
"Yes, ma'am,"
Byrne replied, tipping his hat slightly with thumb and forefinger. When she finished her chug, she pointed toward the back of the bar. "He's got a workshop just past the potty," Joe said sullenly. Byrne gave her a sideways look with his one human eye, and she shot, "Oh, give me a break. I have a fucking 3-year-old too."
"Right,"
Byrne said, and put a hand on Moss's back to lead him through the bar. Patrons sat in plastic chairs printed to look like wood at circular tables of the same material, and took no notice of the two. All of them drinking in silence, staring at the wall-mounted screens, palm screens, lens screens, or most often the staff. They walked down a hallway of paintings of cowboys and bison, past a bathroom to a narrow doorway with stringed beads as a door. Byrne parted the beads to reveal a young man hunched over circuitry with a soldering iron in one hand, large goggles over his eyes, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. His skin was as dark as his mother's, and he was similarly dreadlocked. When he turned to face them and pulled the mask off, he was her spitting image. His eyes had been upgraded and glimmered an unnatural blue. To Moss, he looked like a child.
"Remember me?"
Byrne asked, tipping his hat up slightly to reveal more of his face.
"Of course, Mr. Byrne,"
Willis said hurriedly. He looked so excited that Moss thought he was going to vibrate off the face of the earth.
"Byrne is fine," he said. "Here you want to group up?"
"I do," the kid answered in a tone Moss deemed too excited. At that moment he envied the young man. All of this had been thrust upon Moss, but this kid was being offered an opportunity.
"Think you're ready?"
Byrne asked, before clearing his throat and coughing loudly into the room. The kid clapped his hands, the sound ringing in Moss's ears. "Oh, hell yeah!" Byrne folded his arms in front of his chest.
"Show me something."
"You want an RL display?" Willis asked, holding his hands open in front of him.
"Yes,"
Byrne replied. "Old school, love it," he said, one of his eyes projecting a screen full of data as the other eye went black. Line after line moved across the screen, and Moss was in awe of someone so young doing something so complex. "Hey, Byrne," Moss heard the familiar accent of SETI. "Someone just transferred $5 million into Squirrel account. I can't trace it, but I'm trying. You give access codes or just run a scam or something?
Something like that,
Byrne said aloud, and Willis turned to them as the projected screen vanished, a broad smile across his face. Wicked, huh? Willis beamed with pride. Hey, SETI, I dropped the cash, he added in their minds.
Risky, more like, Byrne grumbled. And you tapped our network the second you walked in,
Willis said. He could not hide his pride. He was good and he knew it. Plus, it wasn't risky. It was such a small amount and I snatched it from an account in Tokyo. Ran it through D2E servers anyway, so anyone smart enough to try and trace it would think it's corporate espionage. Gotta love messing with the bigwigs. Moss could see that Byrne was impressed, though he tried to hide it. Man, Patchwork, you're getting good, SETI said. Shit, praise from Caesar, thanks, Willis said. Byrne cocked his head. Patchwork? Yeah, Mom's the only one who calls me Willis anymore, he explained, sounding like a kid to Moss.
Right. Well, Patchwork, skills like this, why work with us? Go legit, you could retire in a year. Or better yet, just do this a few more times and buy your mom a villa downtown, Byrne said. Nah, man. You served with her. She'd never abide it, Patchwork said, shaking his head. He began to pull small items from his desk and placing them by a bag near his feet. Got that right, I suppose,
Byrne admitted. Plus, I meet a lot of old-timers, vets and stuff in the bar. You all got right shafted, and I want to work with those who want to make that right, he said, serious and solemn for the first time.
A respectable answer,
Byrne told him.
Want to ride with us for a bit?
Yes, sir, I do, Patchwork answered reverentially, stubbing out his cigarette. I want to update your systems, though. Rosetta had some antiquated shit running. It's how I got to you so easy. Carcer has some sharp techs, too.
Don't speak ill of the dead, son,
Byrne thundered, and the kid raised his hands defensively as guilt needled Moss once more. No offense intended. I didn't know, Patchwork apologized, sounding both genuinely remorseful and sad at the news.
Not knowing is a good time to keep your mouth shut,
Byrne put to him. Moss understood the point Byrne was making, but it bothered him slightly, as Byrne himself had been so cavalier about Rosetta's death moments before. Heard, Patchwork announced.
When can you start?
Byrne asked. Now. Patchwork pulled a loaded duffel bag from under his workbench. I've been waiting for you. He smirked.
You can come with us now. You and I will get to know one another while Moss here gets a new hoof,
Byrne said, pointing to Moss's bloody foot. Moss looked down. The wound still looked bad, though he no longer felt any pain. Yikes! Patchwork's eyes grew wide. Sounds good. I'll run and say bye to Mom, go upstairs, and kiss my little sis. Give me a minute.
Sure thing,
Byrne agreed easily as the kid left the room. When he stood, Moss noticed a long, slender, curved sword hanging from his belt in an ornate sheath. He found it remarkable that no one he had met seemed to travel unarmed. Patchwork yelled down the hallway, Nice to meet you, Moss! You too, Moss called after, unheard under the twangy music playing throughout the bar.
Seems like a good kid,
Byrne admitted. Yeah, Moss agreed before excusing himself to the restroom. When he returned, Patchwork and Byrne were speaking of things to come. Patchwork wore all black jeans and a black shirt with nearly 300 zeros and ones printed in white across the front in tiny font. He caught Moss looking. Rad, right? He asked. Moss nodded. Sure. It says, if you can read this, let's talk. In binary code, he explained, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Neat, Moss said in the same voice he used on Gibbs when he changed the posters in his room.
All right, boys, Byrne said. Patch, do me a quick favor and throw some blockware on Moss.
Oh, sure thing, he said, turning to Moss as his electronic eye began its work. Who got you? Armstrongs, Chundercats, the Fried Brick, Talk? Bonk City, Moss told him, and the kid guffawed and clapped his hands together. Shit, really? You gotta take it easy on those relief aids, he shouted through his laughter. Moss felt his face burn with embarrassment. Patchwork noticed. Shit, sorry, Patchwork said, and he meant it. He clapped Moss on the shoulder. Can't seem to help but put my foot right in it. You're all right, Moss said.
Let's ride,
Byrne said, and the three left the bar, Byrne taking one more shot for the road. They walked in silence through the sprawl as the darkness of the sky gave way to the early morning light. An orange haze lay over the city, making the world monochrome rust and reflected glow. The narrow streets opened to a large plaza. Families milled about before a sizable semicircular sign reading Carnival of Wonders in neon lights. They approached a woman by the entrance who seemed annoyed to interrupt her lens screen feed to speak with them. "We don't open for a half hour," she said while chewing something, making her seem all the more disinterested in what he had to say.
"We're here to see the farrier,"
Byrne told her, looming ominously over her. She did not notice, and Moss guessed that a life of dealing with the public had made her immune to shows of intimidation. "We don't open for a half hour," she repeated, and turned her face from them to imply that the conversation was at an end.
"Look at me,"
Byrne said, so much threat dropping from his words that Moss saw her lens go blank.
"We are here to see the farrier. He is expecting us and does not like to be kept waiting. Call your boss and say that Byrne is here."
She was nervous and clearly wanted nothing more to do with this situation. "You know where you were going?"
"Yes,"
Byrne put plainly. "Just head on through." She waved her hand before her lens turned back on and she was gone from the real world. They walked down a path with crude maps of the small hillside carnival. They passed row after row of small, walled-off enclosures with animals. Moss stopped to stare at a koala sleeping in a tree. Other than the tiger and the burb, he had never seen animals up close before. "All true clones," Patchwork told him as he sidled up beside. Moss didn't turn his head. He just kept gawking. "Not robotic replicas?" "Nah, those you can buy. Shit, you want a koala for your house? You just need the cash," Patchwork said. "People come here for the real thing." Incredible. Moss appreciated the fact that Byrne wasn't hurrying them off. He turned and they continued. Moss had to stop every few feet to stare in childlike wonder at the animals, while the other two smoked and chatted. Employees were beginning to set up booths and tents, but paid no mind to them as they approached a brick building with an open door. Byrne ushered them in, and they were met by an unnaturally tall man whose mechanical legs reached nearly to Moss's torso. They looked like that of a drudge with large gears at the knee and ankle. His arms, too, were robotic, but made of finer material, the human form perfectly mimicked, like that of a relief aid but with clear skin, revealing the masterful inner workings. He had no hair on his body, his shirtless chest glistening with sweat, and the lack of eyebrows giving him an expression which was difficult to read. Behind him was an old horse stable converted to a workshop, each stall fitted with a table long enough for a person, with monitors overhead and large robotic arms, lights, and cameras.
"Byrne, my boy, not giving you troubles?"
he asked in what Moss took to be a British accent. Byrne grunted.
"Always, but not why I'm here. Ever the cunt, what can I do for you then?" he asked with a smart-ass grin. "Start by leaving that language outside,"
Byrne said. Moss smirked. Byrne's language was hardly clean, and he would have a hard time trying to censor himself in front of Patchwork. "My place, my rules, you prick," the farrier said, enjoying himself immensely. Byrne pointed to Moss's blood-soaked wrap.
"We're here to get my friend a new foot."
"That's an easy one. And who are these friends of yours?"
"Little one's Moss, and the even littler one is Patchwork,"
Byrne said, pointing to them in turn as he spoke. "Pleasure to meet you, gents," he said, shaking both their hands. Moss watched the machinery work within the man's arm as he moved, and was amazed by how lifelike the translucent skin felt. Warm to the touch, but calloused, like that of someone who did manual labor. "Sadly, this isn't my work," the farrier told Moss, catching his admiration. "But don't think of it like that old joke about barbers." Moss shook his head. "I don't know it. Kids and your screens. No one just sits around and tells jokes anymore," he admonished, and Moss caught Byrne's smile out of the corner of his eye. "More of a riddle than a joke, truth be told. You walk into a barber shop and see two barbers, one with a wonderful haircut and one with a shite one. Who do you have cut your hair?" "The one with a good-ass hair, obviously," Patchwork answered quickly, shaking his dreadlocks with a flourish. Moss smirked. "The one with the bad haircut, since he must have been the one who performed the good one," Moss said. "Right you are, lad," the farrier beamed. "Point being, just because I have these wonderful arms doesn't mean I give a bad haircut, if you take my point." "I do," Moss nodded, and as they made their way around the building, he couldn't help but notice the overwhelming smell of animal. All of the grounds had smelled vaguely like the wildlife, but there was something about this building that stank even more. "Right, well, what are you thinking?" About my foot?" Moss clarified. "No, about your mother's tits. Yes, about the foot," the farrier said with a hearty laugh. "I don't really know," he admitted. He had never given much thought to augments and had been so consumed with a message from his father that he hadn't even considered what he might want to do about his foot. "Is kid a bub?" the farrier asked Byrne, who simply nodded. "Right, well, let's show you some options," he said, pointing to a screen on the wall. "We are going to replace from the knee down, give you a little oomph." The screen displayed an MR 98.4 leg, simple and sleek. 2 long, black, spring-loaded retracting shafts with mounted battery and front-facing solar recharge joined to 3 toes, 2 front-facing and 1 back for increased support. "Mid-range model? What do you think?" Moss looked to the legs of the farrier and shook his head. He did not mind the fact that he was going to be replaced in part, but did not want to resemble Moss too. "Anything more?" he began. "Real?" the farrier interrupted. "Yes, I have it," the farrier said, bringing up an image of what looked to Moss like a natural human leg. "Integrates distance detection and impact force with a look so real someone will have to scan you to tell. Made by Atsuko Adroittech, same folks who build the sexbots, top of the line." "I like that," Moss said excitedly. The farrier appraised him. "Just the one?" "I think I would like both," Moss answered, surprising himself. The idea of moving on 2 powerful legs excited him. "In for a penny!" The farrier winked. "Speaking of pennies," he began, looking at Byrne.
"Kid wants both, do it. This one here is going to treat."
Byrne hooked a thumb at Patchwork. "Oh, I see how it is," Patchwork said with a theatrical eye roll before he went to work, his eye firing input from some far-off bank account. "How much? Sort that out later," the farrier said, laying a hand on Moss and leading him to a stall. The ground shook with the impact of every one of the farrier's massive steps, rattling the tools which lined the walls. He gestured to Moss to lay on the table, and he did. One of the arms placed a mask over his nose and mouth. "You'll be down a while, but it'll feel like a warm dream and you'll come out the other end a new man. No one does biotech like me." The farrier smiled, revealing perfectly straight white teeth, which Moss stared at as the gas entered his lungs. He thought about how fast everything was happening as he drifted to sleep. Chapter 15. Moss opened his eyes slowly, confused as to where he was and what he was doing. He was aware that there were no ocean sounds and of the oppressive light flooding his vision. An old man with one eye and a beard entered his field of view. "I know you?" Moss asked, his voice hoarse and mouth dry, tasting of chemicals.
"Some would say,"
Byrne answered, looking down kindly on Moss.
"How you feeling?"
Moss blinked, beginning to recall. "Blinded," he answered, and Byrne nodded, sliding away the large, round, 3-bulbed light. "Better?" he asked, in an uncharacteristically sympathetic tone. Moss looked around, trying to get his bearings. "Yeah," he mumbled. He was having a hard time moving, his limbs feeling slow to react, as if he was underwater.
"Feet hurt?"
Byrne asked, and Moss began to remember. He tried to raise his head to look down, but he couldn't muster the strength. "They shouldn't," a voice said from somewhere else in the room. Byrne hissed over his shoulder.
"Weren't asking you."
"Nothing hurts," Moss replied. "I feel wonderful."
"And drug addicts rejoiced,"
Moss heard Patchwork joke. He rolled his eyes around as his focus returned.
"The kid also got into your implants some when you were under. A couple of upgrades. Hope you don't mind,"
Byrne informed him. "Fine by me," Moss said. Is he okay?" Byrne grimaced.
"Don't rightly know,"
he said. "Patch will get you through to her when we get back." "Good. I miss her," Moss said, thinking about how beautiful she was to him. Byrne smiled, but Moss saw the sadness in his eyes. His smile wasn't a very good liar.
"Sure you do. We'll help her out,"
he promised. Moss smiled and felt the table shift beneath him as the farrier approached, looming over him. Moss grinned up at the man. "You're big." "It's what the fellas tell me," he said with a wink, but Moss was too groggy to understand innuendo. "Neat," he said, and the farrier smiled, those teeth reminding Moss of a time which felt long removed. "Think you can wiggle those toes?" he asked. Moss attempted to lift his head again to look down, but to no avail. "Am I doing it?" he asked. His mind was telling his body to move the digits, but he could not feel if it was actually happening. "Yes, sir," the farrier said. "They look good. Very real." Scars? Moss asked, as the farrier poked at his foot with a stylus. Oh, I feel that. Looking at Moss's legs with pride, he said, Good.
Did good work, Byrne added. No scars, kid.
Moss felt a weak smile cross his lips. Can I get some water? He asked, and the farrier moved quickly to get him a hydrogel tube, which he slurped down quickly. Byrne lit a cigarette, and the farrier turned on him quickly. This is a medical office. Take that shit outside, he snarled, and Byrne shot Moss what he took to be a wink as he stood up and left, appearing on a security monitor mounted on the far wall opposite the stall. Up to standing? Not quite, he said truthfully, and the farrier tapped at a screen, sending one of the mechanical arms down with a needle that stuck Moss in the bicep. Like a video of morning fog played in fast forward, the weakness and haze lifted from Moss's mind and body. He knew he could stand. Felt like he could run if asked to. That is something, he remarked, amazed at how good he felt. Moss sat up and looked down his body to the legs, which looked nearly identical to his natural ones. The pigment of the skin was slightly off, but as he watched, it seemed to be slowly shifting to that of his thigh. Remarkable, he uttered, wiggling his toes and bending one leg at the knee. As he did, he realized for the first time that he wore only a towel from the waist down. Oh, he said. The farrier took his meaning. Think of me as a doctor. Sure, Moss said uneasily. But all of my doctors have been drudges.
Of course they were,
he snorted derisively. Takes a machine to diagnose a man, eh? Sure do things different in the burbs. The programs are able to determine illness at a much higher accuracy rate than a human. Far fewer errors, Moss argued. He had always liked that it was machines rather than people who had checked him. He had felt a trust for them, which he had not with humans. Even deep-learning algorithmic AIs require human oversight, but whatever you say. Now don't go trying to kick any doors in, the farrier said, smirking at his own comment. Though you will be able to, once you get a handle for them. Thank you, Moss said, with full sincerity. He thought it truly remarkable that he had been healed so expertly, so quickly. He was incredibly grateful to the massive man and to Byrne. My pleasure, the farrier said. And I mean that. Your little friend paid me handsomely for this. I'll bet, Moss said. I guess getting shot wasn't the worst thing. Don't you worry, keep running with Byrne and you'll be back here in no time, he joked, and made a gun shape with his forefinger and thumb, leveling it at Moss. Can I try them out? He asked as he slid to the side, dropping his legs over the lip of the table and sending his body crashing to the ground. The farrier unsuccessfully tried to mask his amusement. The weight is slightly different, he said, pulling Moss to his feet. They're designed to be similar, but it's a little more than just bones, muscle, and veins in there. Right, Moss said, uneasily taking a step. Though the legs obeyed his mind, the movement did not feel fluid. The farrier watched Moss move, stroking his chin thoughtfully. The programs are adaptive and will learn how you shift your weight, but it will take time. Time is something we don't really have, Moss said, thinking about his father's riddle. He wanted more than anything to crack the code and prove his value. Especially now after costing them so much. He took more steps, clutching the towel tight around his waist. It was remarkable to him that he could feel the cold floor under his feet just as he would have before. The machinery sent the proper signals to his brain. He had known they would, but it still struck him as amazing to experience. Moss and the farrier both turned at once as they heard raised voices coming from outside the door. Moss turned to the monitor to see Byrne with his hand on his gun, and Patchwork gripping his sword, speaking with unseen people. Drugged, tired, recovering from surgery, and overwhelmed by everything that had happened, Moss shuddered at the prospect of any more action. His heart began to race. Had Carcer tracked them down? He reached with a new instinct for the kingfisher, but found only flesh. He hurried to get dressed, his body lurching unnaturally from place to place. His eyes kept flashing to the monitor as the farrier boomed from the room out the front door. Moss followed quickly behind on unsteady legs to see the three men flanked on all sides by a semicircle of Legion bikers, their families out for a nice evening huddled behind them. Moss had expected it to be daytime, but realized he didn't know how long he had been under. Listen, mates, this building has defenses you don't want to test, the farrier intoned, and the bikers shifted uneasily, trying to maintain their threatening air. A burly woman with a shaved head and President stitched to her vest strode forward, not in the least intimidated by the threat. Listen, friend, you don't want any part of this. These fuckers killed one of ours. Blood for blood, she seethed, a grenade clutched in a cheap cybernetic arm. Turrets dropped from the awning above the Farrier and buzzed to life, intimidating red dots appearing on the shifting foreheads of the bikers. The Farrier pointed to the grenade. "It'll be dropped before you loose that. No need to let your families watch you die." The leader seemed no more frightened, but could calculate a loss when she saw one.
"Perhaps we can parlay," Byrne offered. "Common enemies can make new friends."
"But you're my enemy," the leader said, her head cocking to the side and eyes calculating. Byrne shrugged and tossed his cigarette to the ground, letting it burn down rather than stamping it out.
"Don't need to be."
"We could give you money," Patchwork offered, and Moss watched as Byrne's head dropped. "You think you can buy us, you sewer rat? We're not for fucking sale. The only payment I want is the top of his fucking head," she said. But as she did, the fist which clutched the grenade fired upward and broke her nose, sending her reeling back into the other bikers. "Run!" Byrne screamed as the turrets began to whir. Many bikers pulled weapons while the others rushed to their leader. The Farrier ducked back inside his office as Moss's new legs sprang him forward and away. The bikers screamed obscenities after them. They darted between the caging, birds squawking and flapping all around. They stayed low and moved away as quickly as they could, knowing they were severely outnumbered without the protection of the turrets.
"Never get a deal now,"
Byrne hissed. "Called me sewer rat," Patchwork justified. Byrne shook his head with disgust, but even in the heat of the moment, Moss had to admit to himself that the kid's skills were impressive. As they weaved through the carnival, Patchwork said, "I saw a ride we can borrow." A performer sent a breath of fire into the air to the oohs and ahs of a gathered crowd. The three moved to the entrance, hearing the threats of the bikers closing in behind them. They rushed through the people standing by the gate, Moss constantly tripping and falling over himself. The legs carried him at a remarkable speed, and he was easily able to keep pace with Patchwork, who guided them back into the plaza, now full of ground cars. A sleek silver Audon coupe turned on, lights flooding the lot and doors swinging open. The engine revved at Patchwork's command and drove right over to meet them, the three jumping in as the doors began to close. "Borrow," Moss huffed as he jammed into the back of the beautiful automobile. It had a wide, thin grille that turned slightly upward like a grin and a strip of bright headlight that curved along the entire front, from side to the other. The car was low to the ground and lighted beneath. Patchwork shot him a shit-eating grin. "Semantics!" The vehicle fishtailed nauseatingly, navving toward the nearest road. The first shot rang out as they fled, terrified screams following closely behind. The rear windshield crunched and spiderwebbed. "Debris has collided with the vehicle. Please return to the nearest Audon authorized dealership for repairs. Great deals can be found at Automo Auto Repair. Please select yes to make that your destination," a computerized voice offered through the speakers. The nav screen went blank as Patchwork took over the remainder of the systems. They accelerated fast along a narrow alley of fresh tar. Moss gripped both sides of the car, his head swimming. Patchwork grinned over his shoulder. "Normal post-op, right?" Moss was too nauseated to answer. He turned to look back as he heard the roar of a motorcycle behind them. Headlight after headlight rounded the corner, streaming after them like bees from a kicked nest. Moss pulled his weapon, sliding around the leather upholstery as he moved. He focused, hard, trying to regain control of his mind. He would need it now. The car was tight, with almost no room to move around, and he could hardly extend his arm to aim. He wondered what was going to happen when he pulled the trigger with the muzzle pressed against the glass. As one of the bikes neared, the rear windshield hissed and rocketed off the frame of the car, slamming into the bike. It pinwheeled up, sending its rider slamming to the ground, wailing as his body broke. Patchwork let out a satisfied little snicker. "They should put that in the ads. Saves you from being trapped and from gangsters." Patchwork laughed as they passed out of the alley onto a 4-lane road. The bikers whooped and hollered as they got closer, brandishing pipes and bats. A bike with a sidecar neared, the man riding along pulling out a long double-barreled shotgun. Moss felt Byrne's sleeve against his cheek before seeing the line laser split the beam connecting the sidecar, sending it spinning into another bike. Video games had taught him that vehicles all exploded upon impact, but all he saw was crunching metal and blood. Moss could not believe his eyes as one of the thugs jumped up, feet on the seat of his bike, fixing to jump to the car. He pointed his Kingfisher but fired wide, the biker grinning wildly as he neared. Moss fired again, striking the tire and sending the bike flipping through the air. The thug crashed on top of the trunk. Crazed, he reached in and grabbed Moss by the throat. He and Byrne both fired at once, demolishing the man's face, and for the second time spraying Moss with blood. The man's grip went limp as his body slid off the car. Moss sputtered and gagged for air. He coughed as he fired wildly at the remaining bikes, missing every shot. Flashing red lights filled the sky as drones buzzed in. "When it rains," Patchwork said, his second eye going dark. "Bounties have been issued for the drivers of these vehicles. Pull over at once," a harsh robotic voice commanded from one of the drones. Moss fired into the sky and managed to hit one of the drones, sending it plummeting to the ground, where a biker crashed into it, the rider flying forward 10 meters before slamming to the road. Another drone wheeled around and fired a net onto one of its partners, before crashing into the lighted sign for a hotel. Only 2 drones and 3 bikes remained, but Carcer was not about to lose any more hardware. A machine gun dropped from the bottom of each drone and began firing, spraying the road, car, and bikes with bullets. Like in a monstrous rainstorm, the car rattled and shook violently as the bullets dented and passed through. "I can't do everything at once!" Patchwork yelled as the fire stopped, giving the drones time to cool off. "You're old! Drive this thing manually!" he ordered to Byrne as a steering wheel unfolded before him. Byrne gripped the wheel and the car shuddered as he took control from the computer. Byrne then spun the wheel, sending the car turning back the way they had been driving moments before. He reached out the driver's window and grabbed a thug clear off his bike as his machine zoomed past them. Byrne dragged him, kicking and thrashing before throwing him to the pavement. The car leapt as the rear wheel struck the biker. The 2 drones began to fire again, spitting metal and glass into the car. "Gotcha!" Patchwork said with a grin, and one drone turned its weapon on another biker, shredding her back in a waterfall of blood before turning on the other drone, blasting it from the sky. The final bike squealed as it turned to leave, and the final drone crashed itself to the street. The road was empty as they kept driving, Moss's ears ringing in the silence. Byrne took the first exit, driving them onto a side street, hidden from above by the scaffolding apartments. They pulled into an alley and abandoned the car. Patchwork, panting and smiling, looked at the destroyed vehicle. "Some rich fucker is in for a bad day." "Yeah, it'll be a little more than pieces within an hour," Byrne said, lighting a cigarette and opening his duster to reveal blood. "Just grazed me," he announced, and put his finger through a hole in the duster, clicking his tongue with disappointment. "Let's get a drink." Moss looked around, his apprehension obvious. "Won't this area be swarming soon?" "No doubt, but they will secure the skies and roads for a while, so laying low will be our best bet," Byrne said as he led them away from the car. "You two all right?" Moss nodded, his new definition of all right being markedly different than before. "Hell yes," Patchwork said. "That was some action right there." "Promised your mother I'd keep you out of harm's way," Byrne reminded him. "And you did. I put us in harm's way myself," he said unabashedly. "Not wrong," Byrne agreed as they rounded a corner onto another large thoroughfare. They walked for what felt like an eternity to Moss, occasionally ducking into market stalls when a drone buzzed overhead. "Moving pretty good," Byrne said, and Moss took a moment to register. In the attack, he had completely forgotten he had just undergone surgery. The only reminder was the fact that it felt as if it had been night for as long as he could remember. "Yeah," he agreed. "Think the farrier got out of it okay?" "Sure he did," Byrne said. "Man's been through worse than a couple of ruffians at his door." Patchwork nodded as though he knew. "I bet." "Kid, you're going to have to calm yourself some if you want to keep a position," Byrne told him. "I know, I messed that one up, but you have to admit I helped us get clear of it pretty good, too," he boasted. "You got skills, I'll grant you. But that's only a part of it," Byrne said. "Moss here is straight off the turnip truck, but has good instincts for what to do and when. Natural talent will only get you so far." Moss couldn't help but smile at that. Patchwork took a deep breath and promised, "I'll do better." "See that you do. Things are only going to get hairier from here." "What's our next move?" he asked, and Moss once again racked his brain over the one-word puzzle. It helped him to focus on that rather than the smoldering ruin of a bullet-ridden vehicle they had left behind, or the fact that once again he had nearly been killed. Byrne gave a little smirk. "We're going to take down Thudiko." "That's what I'm talking about," Patchwork said, and though his enthusiasm clearly rubbed Byrne wrong, it amused Moss. "How?" "In here," Byrne said, ushering them into a street-side bar stall. Wood framed with paper walls, it was a tight space with 3 stools set before a bar. A drudge worked behind the counter, dusting bottles with shots of air from its fingertips. It turned as they entered, and Byrne held up 3 fingers. "With drinks." The machine set 3 empty bowls before them as they sat on the stools. It prepared their meals in silence, served them, and placed small cups and a pitcher of warm sake down on the bar.
Turn it to yourself,
Byrne ordered Patchwork, and he obliged. The drudge shut down. After a short while, Patchwork spoke.
Whoever owns this place will get information that he's still active, and I used his vid feed to mock up a quick video of us chatting, he informed them. Wouldn't stand up to scrutiny, but it'll do so long as we pay when we leave. Good, Byrne said. You have a screen?
Something we can all see? Yeah, Patchwork said, pulling the duffel bag he had been wearing as a backpack and moving it to his lap, producing a tablet.
Sync his system,
Byrne told SETI, and the screen soon displayed the goodnight password screen.
What we know, Byrne began, is that Moss's father was a part of a Thudico initiative that could put their employees and possibly the world at risk. Rosetta got us as far as this password, but we need Moss to crack it, as we know his dad wanted it to be him.
Just goodnight? Patchwork asked. Could it be some kind of cipher or anagram? Moss considered the possibility.
Maybe,
he shrugged, his disappointment in himself obvious in his tone.
I'll try and Blackfoot this.
Maybe we don't need to solve it at all.
Okay,
Moss agreed sullenly. He wanted to solve it. Byrne slurped his noodles loudly, little specks of food sticking to his beard as Patchwork worked and Moss thought about his father. Nothing was coming to him. Nothing seemed to fit. He tapped at the password screen, red outlines shaking the input bar every time he gave an incorrect answer. He pushed the tablet away and began eating. The food was better than anything he had eaten in the burb, save the occasional home cooking. The dish was flavorful without being too salty. Everything served in the burbs relied heavily on the imitation salt made from compounds sent from the colonies. He had enjoyed it, until he had tasted real food, and now he would never be able to go back. Though he knew he never would.
This is some locked-down shit, Patchwork said. Your dad was no slouch.
I've never met anything as impregnable as this. He must have written the book on encryption. He was more into biocomputing. I never thought of him as having those type of skills, Moss said, though I'm coming to realize I never really knew him. His own words only deepened his sadness.
Nah, Byrne said, his mouth full. He always said he wasn't keen on that kind of work.
Moss felt a little better. At least he had been right about something. Well, someone has amazing skills. Rosetta was a beast even getting you to this screen, Patchwork said, and Moss's eyes went wide as he kicked himself for not putting it together sooner. He snatched the pad and began typing rapidly. What's Bubba Bear? Patchwork asked as he read the screen. Moss hit enter as he said, It's what my mom called me as a kid. She was a systems analyst and would have known this kind of thing. I can't believe I didn't think of it sooner. But I didn't realize until now how far outside of my dad's realm of understanding it was. The password was accepted, and a new screen appeared. Danger, it read. This program will short-circuit anyone other than Mossy. It will self-destruct if hacked. Only run this program somewhere safe. There was another enter key displayed below the words. We have to get back to the safe house, Moss ordered. Patchwork packed his tablet as Byrne finished his meal and downed the sake straight from the carafe.
Let's get you back, Byrne agreed as he stood. Hopefully things have calmed down. Patch, can you make us invisible to the drones if we need it?
Patchwork grinned. Have you met me? Chapter 16. Things were calm back at the apartment. The crew had left Gibbs alone as they went to a bathhouse and he had been busy tidying the place. Broom in hand, he looked up as the three entered. He looked up at them hopefully. Figured it out? With some help, Moss said, and introduced Gibbs to Patchwork. Byrne flopped onto a cot as Gibbs joined Moss on a couch. Patchwork sat at Rosetta's station, pulling out and carefully placing knickknacks to make it his own. Moss watched him, the guilt returning. The seat had been occupied by someone else only a day earlier, and now they were gone. He wondered if he would ever get used to it. To losing people. Then he wondered if he even should get used to it. Gibbs looked at him with intense interest, pulling Moss back into the moment.
So, what was it?
Long story. Well, not that long really, but largely uninteresting. I mean, it could be, but for a later time, Moss answered hurriedly. Turns out my mom was the mastermind of the program. Gibbs laughed.
Oh, Bubba Bear,
he said, tousling Moss's hair. Shut up. Moss smiled, playfully shoving his shoulder. Sitting next to an old friend and having cracked the now infuriatingly simple riddle, he felt a bit better. Planting the broom and leaning on it, Gibbs asked, How's the leg? So good I keep forgetting about it, Moss admitted. He took that as a good sign that he was going to recover with ease.
Can't beat that,
Gibbs said with a smile, clearly happy for his friend. So, what's next? Moss sighed. Run this program my parents set up and find out.
Ready when you are,
Patchwork informed them. You know what? Moss said. I think I need a few. Patchwork nodded and went back to what he had been doing. Moss looked at his friend and smiled, happy just to take a break for a moment. They had not really stopped since the moment they left the burb, and Moss knew he needed to rest a bit if he was going to be able to continue. What were your next posters going to be? Moss asked, and Gibbs looked like a child given a surprise gift.
Well,
he began, and talked at Moss for the better part of an hour about which ones he had planned on choosing and why. Moss had never cared much about the posters, but he knew how much they meant to Gibbs, and he was happy to listen to an old friend talk about something that excited him. It made Moss feel like he was home, forgetting for a brief moment about surgery, betrayal, death, and evil. As Gibbs spoke, the other members of the crew filtered in one by one, having done different errands after their baths, and each one simply sat down and listened. They were all clean and in new clothes, which still reflected their personal sense of style. Gibbs didn't seem to even notice, too engaged in his passion to care about anything else. As Moss looked around the room at these people he had dedicated himself to work with, he noted them all smiling. Just like him, they all seemed pleased to listen to Gibbs wax on. For as hard as they were, or as mean or cold as they had been, he liked them. Stan had taken him in and been kind. Grimy had saved his friend. Judy had saved his life even after disagreeing with his plan. Ina had opened up to him when she had no reason to, and Byrne, who lay snoring, had supported Moss when he had needed it most. He looked at Chicken Thumbs and saw a kindred spirit. The man clearly wanted to help, but did not yet seem capable. Moss very much felt the same way, even though he knew he could rise to an occasion when put to it. When Gibbs had finished, they all moved around him to ask questions and give input. Patchwork seemed to already know everyone, and so turned to Moss, saying, "Ready?" Moss simply said, "Yes." "Right, come sit here," he said, setting Moss down before the bank of monitors and bringing up the warning screen. "You know what to do," he said, and Moss reached out and hit enter. His world went white as he heard "Synchronization complete" echo in the nothingness. He blinked and was standing in his childhood hex. Feeling a tap on his shoulder, he turned to see his father, just as he remembered him standing before him. He knew this wasn't real. He knew this was some kind of virtual reality. It didn't matter. He hugged his father the way he had wished he could since that night. He wept, and his dad gripped his shoulders to look at him. "You're all grown," his dad said, tears streaming down his face also. Moss managed to mutter, "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Mossy." "What is this?" Moss asked, looking around the room. "This is my life's work," his dad told him. "This is what I created, and what they've bastardized." Moss was amazed at his father's skills. "You uploaded your consciousness?" he asked. His father smiled and shook his head. "No, the me standing before you is an AI construct based on my life experience. The brainwave scans in our implants are constantly running and analyzing. Everything I've seen and done factors into how I read moments and respond. I'm as close to a copy of myself as can exist." Moss was amazed. His father's mannerisms were just right. His tone and the way he spoke was his father. It was amazing and so lifelike that it nearly fooled his mind. "So, this isn't real?" "No. Not in the way I'm sure you want," his dad said, and then his face contorted with pure sadness. "I'm so sorry I never told you." "It's all right, I was a kid. I know you just wanted what was best," Moss said, and he was beginning to believe those words. "I'm so happy you understand. Byrne took you in?" "He did." "That's great. And Grandma?" "She died between when you left and now," Moss told him. It didn't matter that it was a program. He was going to tell his father everything. "That's too bad," he said, registering the loss of his mother with almost no emotion. Moss knew the two of them had a complicated relationship, and wished he could have asked more about it, but his father said, "She would have loved to see you now. I would have loved to have her, too." "I feel so lost," Moss admitted. "I know. I wanted to leave you a message, but I was terrified the company would find it," his father said, and began pacing around the room. Moss smiled. His dad had even programmed his small neuroses into this version of himself. "What happened to you?" I have only vague memories, Moss asked. I don't know. This system was created before that, he explained. I'm sure it didn't end well for me. And Mom? His father grimaced miserably at the idea. For her too. I wanted to protect her from this, just like you, but you know your mother. He trailed off. So, they erased the memories of what happened? Seems that way, Moss admitted. He tried to shake the thought of what fate had befallen his parents from his head. He had seen so much death recently, and picturing his parents meeting some violent end made him feel ill. May actually be for the best, his father said. I just wish I had known enough to prepare me for all this, Moss said. His father looked at him with pride. I'm sure you were doing great. Moss smiled. I'm trying. Your mom and I always knew you were capable of greatness. Thanks, Dad. Moss was overwhelmed by the moment. Spending his whole life thinking he would never see his parents again. It was an unbelievable gift to be standing before his father. He wanted to stay in here forever. Spend time with the man he had lost so long ago. But he knew they had a mission. So, he said seriously, what is Thudiko up to? His dad said. The crux of it. I helped create this technology for the drudges so they could read and react to their operators. So you could work with yourself, as the catchphrase goes. But I soon realized they wanted more. The managers began asking questions that made me nervous. I began to understand they wanted to use this to replace the employees. Moss narrowed his eyes. Replace us how? They intend to upload these reflective AIs into the drudges and do away with their human counterparts. Do away with? Moss asked, though he was sure he knew what he meant. His father's face was grim and serious. He had stopped pacing and was looking at his son with piercing eyes. Kill, Mossy. I expect them to use the prophet root bacteria to infect the employees and replace them with the AI. But why? Why not just program the drudges to do the work? Skills, experience. Programs can do a lot, but nothing is as powerful as the human mind. Combining the employees with their drudges would make the workforce the best automated in the world. Moss was shocked, though not as shocked as he would have been a week earlier. But what about the people, their families? A tragic accident. The company will pay off the families. It'll be a pittance according to our contracts. Then they clear out the bodies and rent the burbs as high-end apartments. All profit. Without having to feed staff, all the crops can be sold off-world. Moss stood aghast, mouth open, hands shaking. He had heard Thudiko called evil. He had known hearing their plan would make him sick, but this was beyond his worst nightmare. For a company to murder its entire workforce, use homegrown technology and skill against the very people who dedicated their lives to it, was something he could barely understand. Money. It was all for money. Somewhere in those golden towers, all the members of the AIC would be getting even richer. I know it's a lot to take in, his father assured Moss. It's why I started working with Byrne. Help to get a team ready to do what needs to be done. If you were seeing me now, it means the plan is already in motion. Moss looked into his father's eyes. I know it already is. How? In the last year, everyone in the burb got sick. They must have been testing the system, laying the groundwork for what was to come, he explained. He thought back to that day, laying on the floor of his hex, the skin under his fingernails turning white as he gripped the rim of the toilet. Covered in sweat and sick, he had felt pangs of guilt for having to miss work. Now he knew. Now he understood that it had all been a part of the plan. He had suffered, and for all the people he knew, that illness would be only the beginning. Then the time is now, his father said, grim determination in his eyes. Who's the team? I know Byrne got you, but who else? Still got the Lovebirds, Stan and Judy? How about Cutter and Grimy? He asked. All in except Cutter. Don't know him, Moss said. Her. Cutter was a street samurai. Good people, but always rushed in headlong. Too bad she'd have been helpful. Moss nodded with a slight smile. Sounds like what Ina does. No kidding. The despondent rich girl really made something of herself. Byrne can't have that effect on people. Happy to hear it. Who's your breaker? Patchwork, Moss said, before correcting. This kid, Willis? His father looked astonished. Willis? He laughed. He was showing me action figures last time I saw him. My, how things change. I'm surprised his mom loosened her grip enough to let Byrne take him. Joe had another kid, a daughter, maybe that's it? Moss offered. That's wonderful, I'm happy for her. Don't know if that's it, but I'm not surprised any kid of hers would want in on the action. Those vets got hit pretty hard. His father's eyes drifted absently away for a moment. So I keep hearing. He trailed off, letting the silence hang a moment. Life outside the burbs is very different, Moss said. It felt like the greatest understatement of his life. His days in the burbs had been so easy, so cushy. It was a shock to see the way most citizens lived, shuffling down the filthy streets to jobs which paid nothing just so they could afford their palm screens. Sure is. Nothing is taken care of and nothing is certain. So I have poverty because a few assholes want another yacht, his dad remarked with venom. Moss's eyes went wide. You swear? People act differently around their kids, but you're all grown now, he said. He appraised his son thoughtfully. I'm really proud of you. Thanks, Dad, or whatever you are. Moss smirked. So what should we do? You have to expose them, he said, no hesitation. Your mother put a Trojan horse program on this drive, which will reprogram Marisol May to run a bulletin throughout the burbs, telling everyone of the plan and encouraging a company-wide revolt. The moment the upload is complete, her new broadcast will begin. Have Willis, or Patchwork rather, add the bit about the illness last year. Will that be enough? The company will try to play it off, say it was rogue hackers, Moss pointed out. Certainly. But the damage will be done. The AIC will never abide such a public disgrace. They will do everything in their power to tear apart Thutoko. There is nothing these companies fear more than the others. It will be the beginning of the end for them, such a company-wide revolt. The moment the upload is complete, her new broadcast will begin. Have Willis, or Patchwork rather, add the bit about the illness last year. Will that be enough? The company will try to play it off, say it was rogue hackers, Moss pointed out. Certainly. But the damage will be done. The AIC will never abide such a public disgrace. They will do everything in their power to tear apart Thutoko. There is nothing these companies fear more than the others. It will be the beginning of the end for them. Trust me. Steady still your eyes? Moss nodded. Yeah. Great. D2E controls the television and internet, but SETI should be able to get the feed out just long enough so that the world can see it too. The counterbreakers will shut her down quickly, but once it's out there, the genie can never be put back in the bottle. Thutoko will be under such intense scrutiny from both within and without that they will have to scrap the plan. Scrap the plan? Moss parroted, his ire up. Dad, we need to take them down. This is some sick shit. The company may come apart, but the world will stay the same. This isn't just about taking down the big bad, kiddo. It's about saving lives. You're stopping corporate genocide, he said, his voice resigned. Moss thought about all the people in all the burbs. I guess, he murmured. I know you want to do more. I admire it, but you must focus on what's before you and all the people you can save. He grabbed Moss's hand and looked him in the eyes. You'll be a hero, even if the people you save don't realize it. Moss knew he was right. He had spent his whole life feeling small and insignificant, but now he was vital to saving lives. There are a couple of problems, though, as you would expect, his dad said. First, you are going to need to get this program to the server banks at Thutoko HQ. It'll be heavily guarded and complex to get to. Once you're there, it has to be you who uploads the program. Mom didn't want to put you in harm's way, but we needed to code it to someone's unique login and scan so that some rogue group couldn't use this for their own purposes. You are the key now. Moss swallowed hard and nodded. I can do it. You have someone on the inside? Izzy or Vihan, your person, Burbsec? He asked. Moss didn't want to admit what happened. Didn't want to believe it. Izzy is Burbsec, but I messed it up, Moss groused, telling his dad everything. After listening intently, he assured Moss, she'll forgive you. But his words lacked conviction. She shouldn't, Moss argued. He could not shake the image of his oldest friend when she realized what Moss was going to do. The sadness, disappointment, and fear written all over her face. She will. She loves you, he said, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. That only makes it worse. Moss's head dropped. Even within the program, he could feel the guilt. His heart raced and his palms were damp. He swallowed hard. I betrayed the one person I could count on. Sounds like you saved her life, his dad reassured him. Moss had tried to convince himself of the same thing, but always came back to the same point. From a man I brought into her life, Moss said. He couldn't bear the memory. Try her, see what happens. Failing that, talk to Vihan. He always had my back and hopefully yours as well. Moss told his dad. He was good to me after. Good. But I wouldn't give to have his korma one more time. He trailed off longingly. Moss smiled at the memory of home. Speak to him. Tell him what's happening. His sense of honor will compel him to help you, no matter what happened with Izzy. Moss knew he was right. Vihan had a sense of propriety to a fault. All right, Moss said. I believe in you, Mossy, his dad told him, and his son felt an encouragement which only a parent can provide. Thanks, Dad, though, he began, but let the silence fill the room, staring at a vase of digital daisies on the counter. His mom had always tried to keep flowers in the hex. It was a nice touch programmed in. His father cocked his head. What? Mossy. I never really liked it, such a lame nickname. You know I called my drudge Moss, too? I blame you for that, he said with a weak smile. Fair enough, his dad answered with amusement, spreading his hands wide. You going to be all right? I am, Moss said, and he believed it. Despite everything, he had a sense of confidence in his and his new friend's abilities. Good. If you ever have any doubts, look to Byrne. He'll be there for you. I know, Moss said. He had come to think of Byrne as a mentor and a person he could count on. But he'll need you, too, his dad said, an unreadable expression on his face. How? To help lead. Moss could not believe the words, and he laughed. I think Byrne has that covered, he said. For now. But he is aging. Biotics are keeping him alive. He will need you. The crew will need you. When this is done and all eyes turn to the AIC, it will be important to have someone with experience from inside the corporate structure. Your family helped to create this, and it will fall to you to continue that legacy. He was deadly serious. Moss shook his head. I'm no leader. Ina or Stan would be a much better choice. Ina is driven by resentment, and Stan is too volatile, he said. Do you remember when we took you to Castle Dome as a kid? No, Moss said. I haven't been outside the bourbon till now. Assholes really did scrape your memory, his dad snarled. We took you there when you were 11. A bunch of kids are taken on an adventure by a guide while the parents drink mimosas poolside and watch from a drone feed. You were the youngest in the crew by a few years, and when you got to the end, everyone wanted to rush headlong into the dragon's den. But you had been listening to the clues along the way. You realized that if you painted the rocks outside the lair to look like gold, you guys could coax the dragon out and steal its riches, saving all the kids from certain defeat. The guide found us after, and said that she'd never seen a kid so young solve the little puzzle. Mom and I knew then and there what kind of man you would become. He beamed. Moss thought about outwitting Ira, about making the quick decision to save Izzy, and believed his father. Right, he said with certainty. His father asked in nearly a whisper, Moss? Yes? Can you tell me about yourself? He looked sad, miserable, and though Moss knew it was a program, and that his father was long dead, he sat and told him all about the years that had passed, and everything which had happened recently. When he was done, he looked at his father. Is this it? Am I able to come back here? Certainly, he answered, though I won't be of much help to you once this is all over. Even still, it's nice to see you, to talk, Moss said. His father smiled thoughtfully. You too, though admittedly I only exist when you're here. That's an odd thought, Moss said. The program felt so real he kept having to remind himself of the truth. Yeah, I wish the real I could be there for you now, he said. His voice was pained. It was obvious that he felt tremendous guilt for not being there for his son. Moss had to marvel at the program once again. Conversing with this version of his father was exactly what he remembered. He thought about Moss too, then. the robot who had felt like a true friend, but which had been mining his mind to create a duplicate. He knew that on a server somewhere, there was a recreation of himself which was as true to him as this was to his father. "This is more than most get," Moss pointed out. His dad let out a sad chuckle. "I suppose that's true." "Did you do this to Mom?" Moss asked hopefully, and his father's sadness deepened, his eyes instantly welling. "She wouldn't let me. Knowing what this technology was being used for, she didn't want a copy out there," he said in a tremulous voice. "She also," he began, but seemed to be lost in thought. "What?" Moss coaxed. He wanted to know, needed to know. "She didn't think it would be good for you to have this version of us when you really didn't," he explained. Moss nodded his understanding, but assured his father, "I like it." His father sat silently a moment before turning to look at Moss. "Honestly, kiddo, I don't think that was it. I honestly believe she didn't like the idea that a program of her would get to watch you grow up when she didn't." Tears began to stream down his face. Nonplussed, Moss didn't speak. "I think it's time." His father's words seemed to need to be forced from his mouth. "Okay." Moss was reluctant to leave. He knew he had work to do. He knew people were waiting and lives depended on him. But he wanted to stay in the false reality. "You'll come back and let me know?" his dad asked hopefully. "I will," Moss said. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Mossy," he said, then smiled. "Moss." Then white. Moss blinked and he was back in the cramped, stinking apartment. The room was silent, and when he swiveled in the chair, all eyes were on him. "You all right?" Byrne asked, and Judy strode over, cup of coffee in hand. He took it and winced at the taste. Judy offered a kind smile. "You'll get there." "What was it?" Ina asked. Moss fixed his eyes at Gibbs. "It was my father. Or a program of my father, rather," Moss said, and he explained everything. When he was done, they all looked at him in stunned silence. Ina stood and cracked her knuckles. "Let's break these fuckers." "Let's save some lives," Byrne corrected. Moss smiled. Part 3. Chapter 17. "SETI, bring it up," Byrne ordered. "And Patch, help get Moss a secured call. We don't have all day to take him back to church, so make it secret. And I mean porn on your mom's computer. Secret." "Heard," Patchwork said, and got to work as SETI brought up a rendering of Thudico HQ. As Moss strode over to Patchwork, Judy grabbed his arm. "I feel like I'm saying this to you a lot, but I'm sorry," they said, smiling as striped hair fell over their face. Moss looked into Judy's dark eyes and smiled slightly. "It's all right. It's not. I just want what's best, and I'm still adjusting to having Bubs involved. I know you guys are trying to help, but it's like sleeping with the enemy." Moss sympathized. "We're all trying to figure this out." "Right," Judy said with a nod, and released Moss so he could make his call. Patchwork informed him that she won't be able to see us. "I know the rules," Moss told him. He was nervous. Though he was excited to see her face and hear her voice, the guilt sat like a cinder block on his chest. "Cool, man. I'll patch you through," he said. One of the screens went black as ringing entered Moss's mind. "The caller you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please try again later," a robotic voice offered helpfully, and Moss's heart sank. He looked over to Chicken Thumbs. Fresh clothes hardly covered the wounds of his questioning. As the voice repeated the phrase again and again, broken only by ceaseless ringing, Moss imagined his oldest friend, stripped and shackled as they accused her of things she did not fully understand. He hated himself, hated Stan, hated this mission. He swore he would do anything he could to help her and spend the rest of his days trying to make amends. "Try her dad," Moss demanded, giving Patchwork the information. He answered after the first ring. "Isabella, is that you? I cannot see you. Are you all right?" he said, breaking what was left of Moss's heart. "No, it's Moss," he forced, saying the words aloud, though he was meant to transmit them through his implant. "Moss, my boy, what has happened? They tell me nothing," Vihan said, his voice cracking. For a man of his stature and Burbsec to be locked out of something meant that it was highest-level security. Not surprising, but disappointing. Are you alone? Moss asked, and the black screen turned on, revealing Vihan's face in an empty hex. Yes, he said. And though Moss knew there were any number of tricks to keep other security officers hidden from a camera, no one could fake the parent's fear written on the man's face. She helped me. I know you know what that means. Burbsec must have her, Moss explained. He could feel himself rubbing his hands together nervously. Not Carcer? Vihan asked, sounding slightly relieved. Byrne had taken a break from the planning to stand by Moss's shoulder.
Duroko would want to question her, wouldn't want to share her with Carcer,
he whispered in Moss's ear, the hair from his beard tickling his flesh. Moss repeated the message. Yes, Vihan agreed. You will help her, yes? Byrne nodded silently. Moss promised. Yes. Thank you, he said graciously. And Moss felt all the more guilty that the man did not ask what Moss's role had been in her capture. He wanted to tell him everything, beg for forgiveness, try to pull this guilt from himself. But he said nothing. You need my help? Yes, Moss answered, the word heavy. He hated having to do it. Having to put Vihan at risk after everything? Vihan knew already. Clearance codes. Yes, Moss answered again. My life here is done. Vihan's eyes looked around the room behind the camera. This man who had dedicated his life to the protection of the burb would now have to flee from it. His name would be hissed with disdain by people who had worked at his side for a lifetime. Moss said, yes, with a heavy finality. I will go into hiding. I have family, he told them. I knew this day would come. My father warned you? Moss asked, his voice breaking. He looked sympathetically into the camera. Oh, yes. You understand we had to keep that from you. I know, Moss said, sick to his stomach at the apologetic nature of the man. He had done so much for Moss, and now he was doing him one final kindness. He had asked so much of this family in so short a time. Moss knew the only thing he could do to repay Vihan. We will bring her to you. Thank you, the man said, his eyes glinting. I will transmit the codes. They may not work for long when they discover I've left. We will move fast, Moss assured him. You can get out undetected? You do not do this so long as I have without learning a few tricks, he said with a wink and wry smile. Moss smiled at him, even though he knew the man could not see him. I'll see you on the other side. On the other side, Vihan repeated, standing and looking around the room as if deciding what he would take with him when he left. Watching his face, Moss realized that the man had clearly known this day would come. He did not look sad, but thoughtful and determined. And if you ever need anything, Moss began, but Vihan held up a hand and looked back. Just get her out and do what you are planning, he intoned. Moss thought it was odd that his digital father had shown more emotion about him than Vihan had shown about his captured daughter. But Moss's father had always been a more emotional man. While many scientists were more stoic and logical, Moss's dad had always been more delicate, even tearing up at the packaged backstories of the Burbs Has Skills contestants. Vihan was different. Though he would laugh and smile over dinner, there was always the underlying seriousness of someone who had spent a lifetime working in security. The technique he used to survive a difficult job was the same technique he was obviously using to deal with the capture of his daughter. Moss knew there was something to learn from both men. Patchwork nodded as the screen went black once more. Everyone in the room went back to planning, as though they had not been listening in. Gibbs could not hide his sorrow. SETI informed them, even though it's a corporate headquarters, it's damn near impenetrable. What if we all dressed up like janitors? Gibbs exclaimed, excited by the idea of a clever ruse. We could wear false beards. You've seen too many movies, Ina mocked. Cleaning is all done by bots. Gibbs nodded in disappointment, his eyes examining Ina. Right, Burbs are the same way. Server room is deep underground, Patchwork explained, the display spinning and zooming to a massive room filled with row upon row of electronic towers. Where is Izzy being held? Moss asked forcefully. That may be our only stroke of luck, Patch said. She's probably here at HQ, being held for questioning by management. They wouldn't want to use any facility partially run by Carcer. If her dad doesn't even have clearance, she's likely here on the 6th floor. Burbsec main office. It's a shock to no one, but they have a holding facility there as well for internal investigations. Moss nodded. We go there first.
It has to be you in the server room.
We can split up and a couple of us can get her out while you do your work, Stan said. No! Moss bellowed, sounding like Byrne. His controlled passion demanded the attention of the room. I will be the first face she sees. We can split up, and you can all clear a path, but I'm getting Izzy. This earned nods of agreement from around the room. We'll obviously place charges here in the server room, but we will want to knock out the lab as well. Judy continued to plan. What charges? Moss asked, and Byrne grabbed him by the arm gently and led him away from the group. Once they were out of earshot, Byrne looked at Moss seriously.
Your father's work. It may be important to you, but we cannot leave it to persist. And those servers with the hacked minds of the employees, they must be destroyed.
No, Moss said quickly, and Byrne furrowed his brow. I mean, no, his work is not that important to me. When I was inside with him, I told him I wanted to do more. He said it was about saving lives. But I see now he was trying to protect a legacy, no matter how it was being used. Ah, Byrne said, appraising his words with a smile. The way he looked at Moss then was with a similar look of pride that his father had shown.
So you're with us, then?
With you and more, Moss said, though it sat uncomfortably with him to betray his father's trust, or even the trust of a rendering of his father. He agreed with the plan. He had wanted to do more to Thutiko, and now they would. They moved back to the group, and Byrne pointed at Ina.
Call it like you see it.
Right, Ina grinned. After breaking in twice and breaking CT out, they will be on high alert, on the lookout for anything. We will need to get the new kid into the control room first thing so he can open doors, turn off guns and cameras, and guide us along. Moss is dead set on finding his friend, so half of us will go with him and get her out. Gibbs, she'll be in rough shape, so we'll want you to get her back here to Grimy quick as you can once she's free. Byrne, Stan, and Judy, you will all move to the servers, get us in, and find a spot for the charges. Once they're set and I get Moss to you, Byrne will watch his back while the three of us find the lab and set up there too. I miss anything? Byrne simply smiled. Yeah, you missed something, Chicken Thumbs said, pacing around the room in a huff. What about me? You'll be Patchwork's back. He'll be busy and you'll need to keep him safe, Ina said. She pointed at the slight kid sitting at the desk, who shot Chicken Thumbs a grateful look.
I promised his mother, so you better keep those guards off him, Bloodbath.
Byrne smirked. CT whined. I veto that!
Moss, Gibbs, what you guys know which we don't? Byrne asked.
Gibbs shrugged, but Moss thought back to Izzy before taking the BurbSec exam. Helping her study had familiarized him with policy and protocol. After a security incident, many of the corporate offices will be locked down after hours, and they will use thermal scans to ensure no one is in the building at any time, Moss told them. Ina scoffed. Well, that's easy. We just wear thermoskins. Pretty lame security measure, you ask me. Only lame if you know you need them, Moss said, and Ina laughed. Right, she said. The question becomes, how do we get Patchwork into the control room? Even if they don't pick us up on thermal, they won't let us just waltz in there. SETI moved the 3D schematic so they could all see the control room located at the top of the building. It was a small space, banks of screens surrounding a single chair. Judy squinted at the rendering. One person? Seriously? Corporate wouldn't trust too many people with that much responsibility, Moss pointed out. We should just pay that guy off and save ourselves a whole lot of trouble, Chicken Thumbs put in, as though it was the obvious answer.
Never could. The person who sits at that desk would be a first-rate stoolie, Byrne said.
He lit a cigarette and took a long drag before letting the smoke slowly drain from between his lips. Gibbs shrugged. Got the power? They must have backup generators, Patchwork said quickly, and the servers will be on their own supply. Moss thought about it. Gibbs, during that big storm last year, how long between when we lost power and the backup came on? Gibbs smiled. 1 minute, 23 seconds. How do you remember that? Ina asked, with pure surprise upon her face. Gibbs smirked and leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head triumphantly. I'm really rather something, he boasted, holding his shoulders up. Moss narrowed his eyes and pointed a finger at Gibbs. Something to do with the game? Fine, destroy the illusion, Gibbs said, plucking a plug converter from between the couch cushions and throwing it at Moss. We were doing a timed endgame raid and our score was beaten by those jerks from Burb 2049 when the power went out. It was the longest minute and 23 seconds of my life, Gibbs whined. You've lived a pretty cushy life then, Judy half-joked. Ina's eyes went wide and she asked excitedly, "What game was it?" It was the first time she sounded her age. Pirates Scourge? Gibbs stuttered, surprised by the question. "Nice! Crack an uncorked mod?" Ina asked eagerly. Gibbs looked at her as though his very honor had been offended by the question. "Obviously." "Oh, man! You ever—" Ina began, but Byrne interrupted. "Children! Can we please return to the potentially life-threatening endeavor at hand?" "How do we get in?" Stan asked, steering the conversation back to the mission. "Slice a window?" Seti suggested before amending. "Scratch that, they have sensors." CT offered. "Micro-EMP?" "That'll set off the alarms," Judy said.
Seti, trace a path from the windows to the control room and time it out, Byrne ordered.
After a moment, she said, "It'll be tight." "Byrne, we're all going to have assignments. How can we knock out the power and be by the window at the same time?" Ina asked.
"Reckon we'll need help,"
Byrne said, and Ina snorted, followed by a chorus of groans from around the room. "Oh no. 02, Ina groused. Byrne stamped his cigarette out on the wall, sending sparks cascading to the ground.
"Can't do this alone, and of all the teams in the city, they are the most reliable crew."
"Most arrogant crew," Ina muttered under her breath, crossing her arms over her chest.
"They your Burb 2049?
Gibbs asked playfully. Ina nodded and huffed. "Exactly." "They're not so bad," Grimy said, to Moss's great surprise. Judy snorted. "You would think that." "Patching you through," Seti announced. One of the screens displayed "Connecting," before revealing an image of a heavy man in full tuxedo, standing in an immaculate white room full of men and women similarly adorned. His white hair was slicked back with precisely groomed mutton chops shaved into arrows pointing to his mouth. His skin was tight, an older man whose fountain of youth was found at the top of a needle. He smiled broadly, blue eyes glimmering as the skin stretched unnaturally. "Captain Bernstein, to what do I owe this dubious pleasure?" he said with no accent, but in such a stilted manner as to nearly give him one. "Has the refuse before you piled to your nethers such that you wish us to attend to your abode?" Byrne let out a long sigh.
"That ain't it.
"Have I before mentioned that the boorish manner in which you speak is an affront to the world's most elegant language?" the man asked, his words so crisp and clear as to sound robotic. Moss felt that the man was more performance piece than personality.
"Every time we speak,"
Byrne put plainly. "Condescension and patronization will get you nowhere, as I imagine a favor is coming forthwith," the man said.
"Right. Listen, James, we need your help and we need it tonight," Byrne said.
"Sir James," he corrected. "A proper man demands a proper title."
"We're making a run at Thudoko. You think I give a hoot about titles?"
Byrne was beginning to fray. His hand moved toward the pocket from which he always produced his cigarettes, but stopped, making a fist instead. "Titles are a cornerstone of a civilized age, wouldn't you agree?" He stalled, obviously willing to wait until Byrne used the proper name. Once more, Byrne took a long, soothing breath to calm himself.
"Sir James, we need your help."
"And you shall have it. Your disquiet dispirits me," Sir James said, half of his mouth turning up. Moss understood why the others seemed to dislike the crew so much. He was relieved to be getting the help, but the ridiculous man immediately annoyed him. In the burbs, expressions of one's personal taste were discouraged. Nearly everyone wore the same things, ate the same things, and watched the same things. Gibbs and his posters were one of the few expressions of personality that Moss had ever seen. Outside the walls of the burbs, things were the opposite. Everyone had their own way of expressing themselves, through their speech, their attire, and attitude. Looking down at himself, he realized that he was still pretty much a blank slate. He kept picking black outfits with little to no expression about them. Byrne interrupted Moss's thoughts as he told Sir James,
"We need you all to hit a power station tonight, at an exact time we designate."
"Ah!" the man crowed delightedly, clasping his hands before his chest. "A task worthy of this aggregation."
"Good, we'll get you the info," Byrne said. "Thanks."
"You wish to continue this correspondence further?" Sir James asked, tilting his head and raising an eyebrow.
"Not even a little," Byrne said, and said he cut the feed.
Byrne produced the whole pack from his pocket and pulled another cigarette. Moss noticed for the first time that the old man's hands were shaking as he held the lighter to the tip of the smoke. "Frick," Ina snorted. She reached out and snatched the pack from Byrne, plucking the cigarette from his mouth and using the embers to light her own.
Man may be a thorn, but he's great in a pinch, and that crew doesn't mess around, Burns said, taking his things back from Ina. Plus, they are nothing if not efficient. We know they can scramble quick. Who even knows how long it would have taken the others to get their shit together?
Ina nodded, and Moss let a wide grin cross his lips. Bernstein? He asked, unable to hide his amusement. All the faces around the room turned, too. Burns shook his head, obviously disinterested in this line of questioning.
Think I got my name from burning my enemies?
Gibbs stroked his chin dramatically.
Plausible,
Gibbs said, and Ina snickered.
Right?
Moss added. Judy cleared their throat. So, they'll hit the power station, and we'll have a little over a minute to get through the window and to the control room.
That'll have to do,
Byrne agreed.
They might have some turrets on battery for just this play, so we'll still want the thermoskins to be safe. We'll go see Chew,
Stan offered, standing in unison with Judy.
Don't tarry, Byrne commanded, and bring back some food.
Your wish, Judy said, and they left. Moss looked around the room. What now? Byrne shrugged.
Rest.
That shower work? Moss asked, pointing to the small bathroom.
Yeah, water use is unlocked, but don't use too much or it'll raise suspicions with the landlords,
Byrne told him. Moss nodded and shut himself into the small room, the smell of mildew filling his nose. Damp towels hung from hooks and lay crumpled on the floor. A light flickered above a broken smart mirror, serving as the only light in the room. He turned on the water, undressed, and stepped in. The warm water robbed him of thought for a time, until he found himself tracing lines with his fingertips along the fusion point of his real and artificial leg. He felt as if he no longer knew who he was, who he had been. But allowing himself a private moment of immodesty, he liked who he was becoming. Chapter 18. Clean and wrapped in his trench coat, Moss awoke to the sound of Stan's heavy footfalls on the floor and the smell of cooked meat and fried potatoes. He knew he had not slept enough. It felt as if there was a thin layer of mold on his brain he couldn't shake. But he roused himself. Judy handed out the thermoskins. They already had theirs on, Stan wearing nothing but his usually tight pants over form-fitting fabric, which glimmered slightly as he moved. Judy wore theirs under jeans and a button-up patterned shirt, the skin only peeking out at the wrists. Moss set his to the side as he slid from the cot and made straight for the bags of food. Stan smiled and handed him a paper bag, grease coating the bottom. Had pizza. Now you gotta try burgers, Stan said with a smile. In case it's your last meal, better make it a good one, right? Right, Moss said, hardly hearing the words as he and Gibbs plopped onto a couch and tore open the bag. He didn't care that he burned the roof of his mouth as he jammed a handful of fries in, moaning with delight. A Royale with cheese, Gibbs said, giddy as a child as he took his first bite, warm liquid from the meat sliding down his chin. Neither of them noticed as the rest of the group watched them in fascination. They're like children, Judy noted as the rest changed and sat down to eat as well. As Moss sucked the tips of his fingers, taking in the remaining savory flavors, Gibbs nudged him with an elbow and nodded to Ina across the room. She was eating a French fry and standing in just the thermoskin, the material tight against her body. Moss knew better than to stare. Gibbs winked and whispered far too loudly for Moss's liking, She gives the butlers a run for their money. Keep staring and she'll put you through a fucking wall, Moss hissed before excusing himself to dress. When he returned, everyone stood about, grim-faced and determined. Judy was making the rounds, checking equipment. Byrne walked over to him. You ready for this? He asked, putting the recharged Kingfisher in his hand. Yes, sir, he said, feeling as if he had never spoken truer words. This may be the end of us, Byrne began. Or the start of something big, Moss cut in, tucking the gun into a holster and shaking the old man's hand. Byrne turned to the group. Let's set the world on fire, he said, and they couldn't keep themselves from cheering. The drone packs carried them over the city, and Moss watched the people bustle about, blissfully unaware of what they would see on the morning news. He had been one of them. No one looked up, and they avoided the airplanes to remain unnoticed. Thuroko HQ came into view amidst a sea of skyscrapers in the heart of the city. One by one, they buzzed close to the top of the tall, dark structure. They paused, hovering next to a window near the top. For someone who didn't even like elevators, hanging so high in the air only added to Moss's stress. Now, Byrne ordered to Sir James. They heard no answer. They waited, a terrifying, heart-pounding time. Nothing happened. Moss imagined somewhere nearby an immaculately dressed group infiltrating a power plant, some substation redistributing the energy from the panels which he and Moss too used to repair. Moss turned his head to see Patchwork next to him, shifting awkwardly. But he turned and smiled. "This is new," he said with an uneasy chuckle. Both their heads cocked as a security drone rounded the corner of the building, scanners working. Moss kicked himself for not thinking of this, and was sure others were feeling the same. "No rest for the weary," Patchwork said through the thermoskin mask as his eye undoubtedly went black beneath the goggles. The drone moved past, its scanners running over the crew gathered before the window, not changing course. Moss's heart thudded as the grid passed over his body, the trench coat swaying in the mild wind. Moss felt no relief, only anger that they hadn't predicted this. The plan had come together so hastily. Were there other things they had missed? Were they walking into a trap? "Good thing he's here," Gibbs said from Moss's left side, his words disappearing into the air around him. Moss agreed, wondering if Rosetta would have been so quick to act before feeling guilty of the question. Hanging there, exposed and unprotected, the moment felt interminable. He began to worry that the other team had been caught, that all this would be for nothing. Then the few dim lights inside went out, and without thinking, he thrust his bot forward. The spider-like machine skittered on sticky legs, sending a laser through the glass, which hissed as it was cut. The sound surrounded him on both sides, and soon there was a square cut in the window pane large enough to crawl through. He pushed, and the heavy glass fell with a soft thud to the carpeted office. He pulled himself inside as the drone released from his back and flew off. The heat signatures would have been a dead giveaway had they worn them inside. Cold shimmered over his body as the thermoskin worked. They all ran the plotted course, Patchwork opening electronic doors before they reached them. SETI was counting down from 83 in their minds, and time seemed to be passing too quickly. The night vision from the goggles made it possible to see, but they still had to be careful, moving through a building they only knew from schematics. Long hallways stretched out, leading to more offices, conference rooms, and workspaces as they made their way to the interior. 1 minute, SETI informed them as she continued to count down. They kept moving in silence. Gibbs wheezed from the exertion behind Moss, whose new legs carried him easily. 30, 29, 28. The countdown was terrifying. Moss couldn't tell how much further they had. A cold sweat coated his body. As they rounded a corner, a gun turret with small green light was mounted on the ceiling, and Moss waited to see if it would open fire. The suits worked. He had been right about one thing, and the presence of the security meant they were close. 15, 14, 13. Moss's nerves were getting to him. He no longer felt the tips of his fingers. Stan held up a fist and they all stopped, pressing themselves against the wall. The large man peeked around a corner and nodded to Judy and Patchwork. 10, 9, and Stan and Judy disappeared around the corner, followed by 2 thuds, and Patchwork ran. Moss rounded the corner to see an open door flanked by 2 Burbsec bodies on the ground. The lights flickered to life as Moss entered the control room. Stan stood over another body, and Patchwork swiveled in a chair before the bank of waking monitors. His fingers danced as he worked the rebooting system. "We got it!" he announced, and a collective sigh was released. "Lucky I'm smart. Started hacking this door from the outside. Could have been caught standing in this hallway with our pants down if I hadn't thought of it." Moss snorted. They had gotten lucky again, and all thanks to Patchwork. The youngest among them was proving to be the most valuable. "That was quick," Judy noted. "When you think you own the world, you don't plan for this," Patchwork said before adding, "I did a lot of work on the front end to be ready. It wasn't like it was child's play." "Bring up some feeds, let's see what we're up against," Byrne demanded, and Patchwork isolated several images from around the facility. Burbsec officers paced and chatted by all the points of interest. "How come they can walk free?" Chicken Thumbs asked, pointing to the guards. Judy explained, "Their armor works the same as the skins." "Shit!" Patchwork gestured to a monitor in the corner, and all eyes turned. In the server room, large drudges with guns for arms moved mechanically through the banks. "Shit," Byrne agreed. He sounded tired and annoyed. Gibbs asked nervously, "What?" "Human guards can be taken down, but we can't do the same with machines," Byrne grumbled. "Hack 'em," Chicken Thumb suggested, as though it was the simplest of solutions. "Oh, I hadn't thought of that," Patchwork said sarcastically, rolling his eyes. "I'm trying already, but they are on a different system, and breaking in may raise the alarm. I may make this look easy, but, this megacorporation is trying to keep things like this from happening."
You keep working at it until we get there,
Burns said, patting Patchwork on the shoulder. Where's Izzy? Moss had held his tongue as long as he could. Patchwork brought up the feeds. The corporate investigation rooms were empty, metal chairs facing each other across a metal table. In the security office, there were a few officers sitting around playing cards. Behind them was a row of windowless numbered doors. Where do those lead? Almost the worst part, that is, Chicken Thumb said in nearly a whisper, his voice weak and tremulous with the memory. What? Moss asked, more aggressively than he had meant to. Those doors lead nearly nowhere, just an upright coffin. You stand, stripped as long as you can or until they come to get you. It's the most isolating and terrifying experience you could imagine, CT explained, his voice cracking at the memory of it. Moss turned, not saying a word, and Ina put a hand on his chest, staring into his eyes. We will go, but you need to be ready, alert, she said, and turned to Gibbs. You too. The two young men nodded and followed Ina out the door. New kid, I think I know the way, but let me know if we miss something. I gotcha, Patchwork told her, and they left the crew to do their work. Ina was out in front as they moved through the hall quickly, and once again Gibbs nudged Moss, pointing to Ina's backside. Will you look at that? He whispered, and Moss wanted to put him through the wall himself, unable to believe his friend at that moment. He knew Gibbs was trying to distract himself from the terror, but he did not care, and Ina wheeled around to face them. A woman doesn't need to be modest to be respected, she said, boring a hole in Gibbs with her eyes. Yes, ma'am, he stuttered. She let the moment hold before laughing. You fucking bubs are so easy to scare. But seriously, stop staring at my ass. Gibbs nodded frantically, and Moss just looked in confusion at the pair. Can we just save our friend? Moss hissed, and strode forward, having memorized the path. His legs carried him easily to the stairwell, where they descended level by level. As they reached their floor, Patchwork alerted them to guards walking the halls outside the door. Wait here, Ina said as she pushed the bar slowly to look. She winked at them and exited, the door shutting quietly behind her. You have to get your shit together, Moss said, cold seriousness in his words. His friend's eyes were wide with fear. Gibbs whimpered, I'm scared. I know, but you need to stuff it. We are all counting on you, and Izzy is going to need a friend. I wish it could be me, but I have things to do, Moss said seriously. His friend registered the words, his eyes hardening with resolve. I can do it. I know you can. You're the one who got me here, remember? Moss said. Right, Gibbs agreed with a smile. They heard the door. Ina had made short work of the guards. Moss! Patchwork yelled in his mind, and Moss turned to see a guard at the door. Moss had no time to think, grabbing the guard by the collar of his armor and pressing his leg against the wall. The machinery in his leg worked at his command, rocketing his body toward the concrete stairs, releasing his grip on the armor as he grabbed for the railing. The guard flew down the stairs before landing on his head, his neck cracking into a right angle. The body slid a few stairs and Gibbs winced. How did you do that? He asked in disbelief. I guess adrenaline hits me differently, Moss said, panting as he hoisted himself to his feet. I'll say, Gibbs agreed. He looked at his friend in a way Moss had never seen before. What? Moss asked, but he suspected the answer. I mean, I guess I've known what you were capable of. Fresh from the burb, you taste a biker, but this was something different, Gibbs said, looking at the body. The kid I brought to the city is gone. Moss knew he was right. They both turned as the door opened once more, and they were relieved as Ina entered. She looked at the body, her own hands dripping crimson. Wow, nice job, Gibbs, she said in affected seriousness, placing a hand on his shoulder. I didn't, he said, missing the joke. Yeah, no shit. She slapped him gently on the cheek. Let's go. Red splashes covered the white walls and seeped into the blue carpet as they walked through the fluorescent hallway to the security office. Signs guided their way now. Thermal offline, Patchwork informed them, and they all pulled their masks from their faces, sweat spraying into the air. Ina yanked a zipper at her throat and pulled it down to just below her navel, revealing cleavage and toned muscle. She looked at Gibbs and shot a wicked smile. Something gross to say? No, ma'am, Gibbs said, and made a show of averting his eyes. They were close now. Moss pulled his kingfisher and whispered, I'll go in first. Your fight, Ina said, sweeping her arm in front of her so Moss could take the lead. He moved forward and saw the door with Security 001 written above. Patchwork had already done his job, and the lock panel displayed green with the word open. He raised his weapon as he pressed the button, the door hissing open, followed instantly by blazing blue and flying cards. 2 guards vibrated and shook, collapsing to the floor. The remaining man lifted his hands, the insignia of a supervisor on his chest plate. "I'm just doing my job," he pleaded. "Me too," Moss snarled as he flicked his thumb and pulled the trigger. The electric shot struck his face, sparking hair, sizzling flesh. Red bone with white eyes still in shock were all that remained, as the body slumped to the ground. "Not evil if you're just following orders," Ina scoffed, but Moss wasn't listening. He pulled his trench coat from his body and darted for the doors, opening one by one. On the third, as the door opened, Izzy puddled into his arms. He wrapped the coat over her back, and she looked up at him, blinking with fear, joy, sadness, and anger all at once. "I'm sorry, Moss," she wailed, and began to weep. He couldn't believe her words. "No, Izzy, you have nothing to apologize for." "I'm sorry," he said, clutching her so tight he never wanted to let go. "She's in shock," Ina informed him, glancing around the room cautiously. "Did they hurt you?" Moss asked, but Izzy seemed to be looking behind him. Her eyes were wide and vacant. He wanted to pick her up and leave, get her as far from this place as he could. But he knew there was still more to do. "Just questions and threats," she answered. But even in his arms she seemed far away. "That room, Moss, that room, I know."